You're listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
Are you done coughing?
Yes.
All right. All right. John Shipley, Gary Brugman, welcome to the podcast, fellas.
Thank you for having me.
John, I'm glad you reached out to me recently Gary kind of connected us. You used to be, you were in the Army. You were a helicopter pilot.
Yes, sir.
You were in the FBI.
I was.
You had, how many years there? Was it 14?
14 years. Started in 96, was fired and prosecuted in 2010.
And you were also a sniper for the FBI, correct?
Yes, sir. I was on the SWAT team in El Paso, Texas, and I was a sniper.
And in 2010, well, I guess prior to that, you had a little run-in with your own department, right? Doing some research on you, there was a gun that was sold. How many guns? There was only one gun that was part of the investigation, right? The one that went into Mexico, or did they add the others afterwards?
Well, they started with one gun.
Okay.
I got a phone call from an ATF agent, and I knew him because his son and my son had played t-ball together, and I considered him a friend. And he called me up and he said, "Hey, did you used to own a Barrett, serial number 20488, 82A1?" And I said,
That's
yes.
kind of ominous that he knows the serial number.
Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, I owned that about a year ago or 8 months ago. I don't know exactly why." He said, "Well, it was found in Mexico. We're trying to figure out how it got over there." I said, "Okay." I said, I have some records at home. I was in Dallas on a TDY from El Paso.
That's where you're stationed, was it El Paso? Okay.
El Paso was my whole career.
Gotcha.
And so I was out in Dallas doing some training, and I was out on TDY. I called my wife, and I said, "Hey, can you look in my records and check if I used to own this gun? The serial number's 20488. And she said, "Yeah, you did." And I said, "Did I sell it?" She goes, "Yeah, you sold it to Armando Rodriguez." I said, "Okay." So I called.
So you were keeping pretty good record of your guns.
Yeah. So, and let me explain why I did that. I started collecting guns when I was in the military. And I realized that if somebody broke into my apartment and those guns went missing, I wouldn't have a way to report them unless I knew their serial numbers.
Right.
Or I knew their make and their model and their serial number.
That's a good habit for all gun owners to keep track of that stuff.
Well, you would think so. But then the ATF will turn around and use that on you later, as you'll hear in my case. So I started keeping all those documents in my computer. And then a couple of years later, my computer crashed. Couldn't get any of that information out. So then I went to a gun store owner and I said, "Hey, how do you keep track of your records? Because if you keep them in a computer and it crashes, you lose all that information." He goes, "Well, we have these books. They're called A&D, Acquisition and Disposition Books. And they have a spot for the make, model, serial number, date purchased, amount purchased, all this different stuff. You can put notes in there." And so I bought some of those books. I asked him, "Hey, do I have to be a dealer to have that book?" And he said, "No, you can go on Amazon.com or wherever and get them." So I did. And I kept track of my guns. Well, when he called me and said, did you used to own this gun?" I said, "Yeah, I sold it to Armando Rodriguez. He's a deputy sheriff in El Paso County. He's a good guy. I've known him for years. And I sold the gun to him." And he said, "Well, what did he do with it?" I said, "I have no idea."
Ask him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can call him up and ask him. And he said, "Okay, we're going to."
And so people understand that's perfectly legal.
Yes, sir.
At least in the state of Texas. Is it everywhere, Gary, or just in the state?
Several states. Florida.
Okay.
I know Florida for sure.
Which is basically, I buy a gun, I use it, I don't want it anymore, or I don't have a use for it. I bought 4 more. I want to sell one off. Legally, I can sell that to you, and now that's in your possession. And there isn't a requirement that says, "Hey, I've got to keep track of this gun."
No bill of sale, no nothing.
Nothing.
Right.
Yep.
So there's nothing illegal about that.
And so what makes it illegal is if you know that the person, for instance, right now as I sit here today, I'm a convicted felon. I have 6 felony convictions on my record. Gary is not a convicted felon, but he has a gun. And he says, "Hey, John, if you want to buy this gun, I know you're a convicted felon, but if you want to buy this gun, give me $600. I give him $600. Well, he's just broken the law because he knows I'm a prohibited person, and I just broke the law because I know I'm a prohibited person and I'm in possession of a firearm.
And that's only because he has knowledge of your history.
That's correct.
If he doesn't, and you don't disclose any of that,
and if you're a private citizen, you have no requirement to go out and vet each person.
check.
You can't. You can't do a background check. You're not a law enforcement agent.
Okay.
So the gun sale that I did to Armando was perfectly legal. What I didn't know was Armando had taken that gun to El Paso, to one of the gun stores in El Paso, and put it on consignment. He never told me that. So,
and that's pretty common too. I
And that
don't want to
is-
slow you down, but I want people to understand that all these things are pretty common.
Very
If you
common.
go to a gun store and you see something's on consignment, somebody is basically asked the gun store, "Hey, can I sell this gun here?" The gun store says, "Okay, I'll sell it to you, and then I'll take a percentage of the sales once we're done." So that's another common thing that happens.
and it's very common with guns like a 50 caliber Barrett, because that's a $10,000 to $12,000 rifle. Not everybody walks into the gun store with $10,000 or $12,000 to buy a rifle.
Right.
So that's the place that's going to get the most visibility and probably get the most, benefits. So
Yeah.
the highest amount of money.
And they're probably going to get the right buyers too, right?
Yes,
it
sir.
may take you forever to find that buyer, and where a gun store might find them pretty quick.
And a gun store is supposed to do a background check on that person, fill out a ATF form 4473. So they're supposed to document it. Now, in my case, I sold person-to-person sale to Armando Rodriguez. He put it on consignment at the gun store. The gun store owner was an informant for the ATF. He was working for them. He sold it to a known gun trafficker that was under ATF investigation at the time, and they let it walk to Mexico.
Okay, let's pause for a second. Let me ask you this: that gun store owner, why is he working for the ATF? And is that common, or was that a rare thing? But why was he working with the ATF to do what he was doing?
Okay, so in my 14 years in the FBI, I worked narcotics, then I went on to sniper and SWAT, and I worked special operations group. It is common for law enforcement, both at the state, local, federal level, to have informants, CIs, people that help them with their investigations. Those people are out there in the world of crime, and they report back to the FBI or to ICE or to whomever, and they provide intel.
So real quick, for somebody like me, if somebody is an informant, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've done something wrong and law enforcement's flipped them. They're just an informant because they're in that area.
So there's several different reasons that people become informants. One could be because they got arrested,
Okay.
and they're working off their charges. Instead of going to prison, the government says, look, if you're trafficking drugs, as an example, if you're trafficking drugs and you get caught, and they say, look, if you can give us 5 other people and we take down 5 loads, we'll tell the judge to go easy on you on this case. So there are some people that are like that, and there are some people that are like you that are just a good American citizen that says, hey, it's my duty to stop terrorism, or my duty to stop gun trafficking, or my duty to stop drugs, and I'm going to provide this information. Some of them do it for money. We would pay informants $50,000, $100,000, several $100,000 if they gave us really good intel.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
The FBI, I can tell you this, the FBI, if you go to the FBI and you say, hey, I know somebody who is a potential domestic terrorist and I think he's going to do a bombing or a shooting or anything else, that's valuable information to the FBI because we're there to protect lives. So some people do it for the right reasons. They don't want anything. Some people do it for money. And some people are motivated because they have a charge or a criminal case against them, and they want that to go away.
Gotcha.
Now, in this particular case, the ATF informant that owned that gun store, he had gotten in trouble because a civilian contractor was in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was stealing government equipment from soldiers, weapons, night vision, thermals, all kinds of sensitive items. He shipped them back to the United States, sent them to that gun store, and he would sell them to anybody who had the money, to the cartel, to drug traffickers, to human traffickers, to anyone that could afford to pay for them. They got caught, and they both became informants for the ATF, and they both testified against me at my trial. So they were not doing it because they're upstanding good people. They were doing it because they were in trouble, and they were trying to save themselves.
They got themselves jammed up.
Yep.
Well, let me ask you this. One thing that amazes me is there's times where, and maybe it's just TV, I don't know, but there's times where you'll see where they say, hey, this guy's a terrible witness because he's got a criminal history. And then there's times where we're using criminals as witnesses and we know it, So it comes down to who's to say when you go word for word, and we're going off of John Shipley's word as opposed to a guy who's been arrested and probably potentially could have charges coming, but now he's working for the ATF. Where's that line of credibility get crossed? You know what I'm saying?
Well, Gabe, it's time for me.
Sure.
Okay.
It is.
But it's the same thing. I pushed a guy on the ground, right? No injuries, no nothing, right? Knocked him on his ass. They ridded a inmate that 6 weeks after that incident tried to choke me out, body slammed me. I broke his nose. He got sentenced to 57 months. They ridded him out of prison to come testify against me. So you're talking about credibility. This guy walked into the courtroom with a U.S. Marshal behind him.
Yeah.
And then when he sat down on the bench to testify, the U.S. Marshal was sitting behind him. He was technically still in custody testifying against me. So basically they went up to him and said, hey, that guy that broke your nose, you want to try to put him in jail and get your freedom back?
I'd love to.
Well, absolutely. Who wouldn't? So same thing.
That's just very. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't keep track of that kind of thing. But it amazes me how, depending on the outcome you want as a prosecuting attorney or whoever else as a judge, we allow certain people to testify against others if it's gonna benefit the outcome that we want to achieve.
Yeah, it's who's telling the story and how does it benefit them. Yeah. I've heard podcasts where they talk about that the justice system is broken. The justice system needs to go for truth and not just winning.
Right.
Winning isn't always right. If you have to cheat to win, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
I learned that on a football field and on a wrestling mat in high school. But yet the ATF cheats and they lie, and then they want you to pat them on the back and tell them how good they are. Well, look, Ruby Ridge was a disaster.
Yeah.
And there's a big joke in the FBI about the ATF being our little brother. They're our little brother because they get into fights that they can't handle. And then they come to the FBI and say, hey, bail us out. They did it at Ruby Ridge. They did it at Waco. They continue to do it. They continue to violate people's rights and then go, hey, wait a second, we can do whatever we want because we're immune from everything. We're federal agents.
Sure.
No, they're not.
Yeah,
they need to start following the rules and following the Constitution and following the law. Stop enforcing policy. Enforce the law.
One thing that I want to let people understand is some people who are listening to this go, well, I'm not an FBI agent. I don't really sell guns. I'm not into guns. It's not going to affect me. But it's very funny because, and this is small potatoes compared to the main topic that we're talking about. But, even just recently, there was an opportunity for folks to buy, AR-15s with arm braces on them. Everybody said, okay, well, I don't want to do the tax stamp. I don't want to, do the SBR. I'm going to go buy one of these guns, and I can get it today. It's got an arm brace on it, and it behaves similar to a stock. I'm just going to do it. So tons of Americans bought these guns because it was almost a no-brainer, right? And then the ATF says, no, that's illegal now. You've got to register it, and you got to register it at SBR. And this is what people don't understand is the ATF making a simple decision like that made zero sense to everybody. All of a sudden, everybody, including myself, you were a felon for a little while because you had an illegal firearm that wasn't registered. And it's funny because people think they hear your story. Your story is common but rare. But something like that was so minor that affected millions of people. And most people probably didn't realize that was happening, but it did.
And what they did is illegal.
Right.
They can't change law.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And this isn't the first time it's happened. So a long time ago, back in the early 1900s, you could buy a machine gun and not have a Class 3 license. And then the government came along and said, hey, we want to if you want a machine gun, you can have one, but you have to have this $200 tax stamp. Well, they bought the machine gun back in 19 whatever for $11.
Yeah.
Okay, because the money wasn't what it is today. So they bought it for $11, and then they said, you have to put a $200 tax stamp. And they all said, well, I'm not doing that. So what do? Overnight, they become felons because they're in possession of a machine gun that's not registered. This isn't the first time the ATF has done this.
Right.
You know,
well, let's get back to the incident with your gun.
Okay.
Because I do the same thing. Sometimes I'll take off.
I do
I'll
too.
get on a little rant. So sometimes you got to circle me back in.
I think the main point he's trying to make is that the U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal government, will lie, cheat, and manipulate the truth and the law in order to get the outcome that they want.
Right.
It's what they do.
And
Right.
in my case, they cannot even deny that they lied. When we went to trial, they said this to a jury. Now, we're talking about a prosecutor, a seasoned prosecutor, an AUSA from El Paso, pointed at me and said, Agent Shipley's gun killed someone in Mexico. He needs to be held responsible for that. They said it 3 times, including in the closing argument. My appellate attorney that briefed the Fifth Circuit said they lied to inflame the jury. He said it's an outright fabrication. The ATF provided a report to the United States attorneys telling them the gun was never fired. And yet they thought, well, if we say that, it's not as inflammatory as if we say somebody was killed with his gun when they knew it was a lie. So if they're willing to lie in federal court to mislead a jury to convict an innocent person, this really isn't about me anymore. I'm 55 years old. I'm good with myself. I know what I've done on this earth that's good and what's not good. And I didn't break these laws.
Where was your gun found?
It was found in a house in Mexico.
Was it a cartel member's house or was it just a...
I don't know.
And I think people who don't understand, it's illegal to own a firearm in Mexico. And I think, if I remember correctly, y'all can correct me, I think there's one gun store in Mexico that you can buy guns from. But it's very difficult to get guns in Mexico. So that's why it's so appealing to cartel members to buy guns from the United States illegally, because it's so hard. You're not supposed to be able to get them in Mexico.
Yeah, that I'll know.
What year did this happen? What was date?
2007 is when it went to Mexico, and then I was convicted in 2010.
So you were convicted. Okay, so you were convicted in 2010, and I believe Fast and Furious, the Operation Fast and Furious, broke in, I think, 2011, right?
Well, it kind of broke in 2010
when they
Brian,
killed Brian Terry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about the true victim. And Brian Terry was a Marine, then a police officer, and then a United States Border Patrol agent. And not just United States Border Patrol, but he trained out at the same places I trained, going through BORTAC selection. And when he went through BORTAC selection, he was the oldest candidate in that class, and he still was the number 1 candidate. He was a total physical specimen.
He was a beast.
A stud, and he is a warrior for this country. And he was killed because of Fast and Furious. The gun that was found near his body that linked up to the bullet that shot him, that went through his femoral artery and killed him, that was linked to Fast and Furious. Now, not every, you can't always say never and always. Those generalizations don't work. Sure. I'm not here to tell you that every ATF agent is a terrible person and that they're against the Constitution and all that. John Dodson is an ATF agent who knew about Fast and Furious. And when Brian got killed, and he watched his superiors say, oh, we're not involved in weapons going to Mexico. We would never do that. And he was like, it's time the truth come out. And he photocopied those documents and went to Senator Grassley and exposed the ATF for what they were doing, because they were lying to people. You have a federal agent that is killed in the line of duty doing his job with a gun that they allowed to sell to the cartel.
Yeah.
And they're trying to act like, no, we didn't have anything to do with that. Jaime Zapata, he was killed with a gun from Fast and Furious. Benghazi, Fast and Furious guns.
Now, let's pause real quick, because I want people, I was talking to you earlier, and it's funny because, and I think I mentioned to you too, when you talk to people about Fast and Furious, they have no clue what it is. They think about the movies, of course, but they have no clue what it is. So can you briefly let people know exactly what the Operation Fast and Furious was?
So Fast and Furious, President Obama wanted to be the savior of I guess, the Democratic Party, and he wanted to ban certain types of guns from American citizens. He had a problem, though. Number one, the NRA. The NRA is super strong. They have great attorneys on their staff, and they're willing to fight for our freedoms. Second thing that they had was the Constitution and the Second Amendment. So what they figured out is, well, wait a second, if we create a problem and we document that problem and show it to the American people, we'll then swoop in later with legislature to fix this problem, and we'll be the heroes. And it's kind of like, Gabe, if I go over to your house and I set it on fire, and then I beat on your door and I call 911 and I drag you out, am I a hero for saving you? No, I created the peril. I put you in that danger. I'm not a hero for getting you out of the danger that I caused. But yet our government, you got Eric Holder, Attorney General of the United States at the time, and you've got President Obama. And these guys decided what we're going to do is we're going to allow gun stores along the southwest border of Mexico. So in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, we're going to let these gun stores, we're going to grant them immunity from prosecution. And we're going to allow them to sell thousands, not 10 guns or 100 guns or hundreds of guns, thousands of guns to known cartel members to take back into Mexico.
So we can track them.
Now, they said, hey, we're going to track these weapons. Now,
What was the means of tracking?
there wasn't. This is an attempt at, hey, don't look over here at the truth, look at the shiny object over here. They put no tracking devices in the weapons, and they had no electronic or physical surveillance in Mexico, even though they have agents that operate in Mexico. There's DEA, there's ICE, there's there's all kinds of American, there's people with diplomatic immunity. They did no physical surveillance on these guns. When they left the store, they'd follow them to the border. Once they got across the border, they could have notified the Mexican officials, the customs officials, hey, stop that car. It's full of guns. They didn't. They let it go. Because their goal wasn't to stop the guns going to Mexico. Their goal was to document murders and crimes committed with these guns so they could swoop in and say, hey, we need stronger laws. Look at how many thousands of guns were found in Mexico. Obviously, the laws we have on the books now don't work. And so they were going to be the saviors and the heroes. Obama was going to be the greatest president ever because he banned 50 calibers. He banned, assault rifles, when actually he created the problem.
Let me ask you this. Obviously, the gun store owner in El Paso was dirty. And maybe that was the majority of gun store owners selling these guns. But did you have were there gun store owners who said, hey, we're not doing this because they understood the ramifications?
So Gary will talk about that a little bit, but I'm going to tell you this. There were some gun owners out there that were upstanding, good citizens. And I would say the majority are great people. They're people that believe in our freedoms. They cooperated because they were told by federal agents, hey, we have this huge investigation and you're helping us. So, of course, they said, well, that's my duty to help our government. So they participated. But then there's other ones that were like, well, wait a second. I'm going to sell 10 times as many guns this month. I'm going to make $1 million this year, and I have absolute immunity. I'm in. And then there were other ones, like the one in El Paso that sold my gun, that they were in trouble, and they didn't have a choice.
Gotcha.
But
I mean, there were some gun store owners in Arizona, it was very well documented, that they called the ATF and said, hey, I don't feel good selling guns to this person. He wants to buy 4 ARs, 5 ARs, 10 ARs or whatnot, and I don't feel good about it. And ATF was like, go ahead and sell them. We're going to track them. And they lost them.
So there's a lot of people that just were under the guise of, hey, this is legit. They're doing the right thing. I'm helping. And of course making money, but I'm helping. Yeah. That's terrible. And what's funny is that's scary that for somebody to go, if somebody in hindsight, right? We always have the luxury of hindsight, but to sit there and go, the ATF's offering me immunity, and I get to sell these guns and make some money. Man, at this point, I would be afraid of any sort of deal with the ATF because who's to say that they're going to stick with it?
Well, here's the problem. These gun store owners have to apply for a license. Who grants that license? The ATF. So Is it coincidence that one of the gun store owners on the border told the ATF, I don't feel comfortable doing this. I think this is going to be bad for us, letting guns go into Mexico. I'm not going to cooperate. And then lo and behold, the next 6 months, he doesn't get his license renewed.
No license.
He's out of business.
Right.
His livelihood is gone now. He doesn't know how to pay his mortgage and his car note and all that stuff.
Dirty.
So the ATF has a tremendous amount of power when you regulate and you also license.
Yeah.
The license shouldn't be held by the ATF. They should have nothing to do with that because they use that as power against them. Hey, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we'll pull your license and you're out of business. Well, 99.999% of the people are going to go, okay, I'm going to do what you tell me to do. Even if they think it's wrong and then they feel it in their gut, they're still going to do the wrong thing.
Okay, so your gun's been sold to a fellow police officer. It's been put on consignment. Mm-hmm. It gets sold and found in Mexico. They come back around to you and say, hey, what's going on? This is where I get real naive because to me, I say, hey, I sold the gun to Gary. Go talk to Gary. I feel like my hands are clean because
I did too.
Legally, my hands are clean.
Well, if I sell Gary a car and then he sells it to you and you sell it to someone else and they traffic drugs with it, are we all involved in trafficking drugs
Exactly.
because we once owned that piece of property?
Right.
No, makes zero sense. But if I sell a gun to Gary, Gary sells it to you, and you sell it to somebody and they use it for something, the ATF is going to come back and try and get all of us. Mm-hmm. Not because it's what's right. It's because that's what pads their stats.
Right.
And what you have to understand, we had in the FBI, we had a thing called a 515. It was a statistical accomplishment. So if you made an arrest or you made a drug seizure or you had a wire intercept that led to a guilty plea, whatever it is, those are accomplishments. And the FBI would rate us on that. And so everybody's like, hey, how many stats do you have this month? How many arrests do you have? How much dope have you taken off the streets? What have you done to justify your existence in the FBI? Well, the ATF is over there going, gosh, there aren't that many criminals out there doing bad things with guns, that I've caught. So
let's create a couple.
Let's create some people. How about John Shipley? Hey, that's a huge. Now think about this. The agent that went after me got promoted as soon as I was convicted. Is that a coincidence? And he got sent from El Paso out to Dallas. He got a cushy job as a supervisor, making a lot more money because he prosecuted a dirty FBI agent and sent him to prison.
Well, let's go through that because I want to know what happens after you have that conversation with the ATF guy you knew, and you told him, the process and what you did. He leaves. Are you assuming you're done, or does he tell you, hey, there's still investigation?
I knew his first name was Frank. I knew Frank because my son and his son played t-ball. And I said, hey, Frank, if Armando, the deputy sheriff, is breaking the law, I said, count me in. He doesn't deserve to carry his badge and be on our team. So if you need help going after him, I'll do whatever I'll wire up or do whatever you want me to do, because if he's selling to the cartel, he's selling to the very people that are trying to kill me.
Us. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And I have no qualms about making sure he goes to prison. And so I thought at that point they were probably going to come back and ask me for my cooperation. And then one day the boss, the special agent in charge of the FBI division in El Paso, calls me and says, I need you in my office at 8 a.m. Monday morning. He told me on Friday. I thought nothing about it. I walk into his office and he says, John, I need you to take your firearm off and hand it to me. I need you to hand me your cell phone.
I know that feeling.
So I was like, so in my mind, in my naive mind, because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, I thought, well, the President of the United States is in the building. When Secret Service is with the President, they won't allow you in a concentric circle. They have security zones. They won't let you so far in with a firearm. So I'm probably going to a briefing where maybe the President or Vice President is there. I don't know what's going on. But as a good soldier does, I take my weapon in the holster, take it off, hand it to him, hand him my cell phone, and we go in. And I walk into this room, and it's maybe 2 or 3 times the size of this. And I see assistant United States attorneys, and I see ATF agents, and I see OIG agents, and all kinds of people. And I walk up to Frank, because I know him. And I said, hey, Frank, what's going on? And he did this. He looked down, he looked away, but he wouldn't look at me. I said, Frank, what's going on, man? He goes, here. He hands me a sheet of paper, and I look at it, and it's a search warrant for my house. I said, Frank, what do you want to find in my house? He said, guns. And I said, well, Frank, I've got 3 gun safes, 2 in my garage and 1 by my bed that I put my duty weapons in it when I come home. I said, you don't need a search warrant. I'll give you consent to search my house. And he goes, no, we're doing a search warrant. And I said, what's going on here, Frank? He said, we think you're trafficking guns to Mexico. I was like, well, and I laughed. And, that was my reaction, because I'm like, I am by the book, straight and narrow, boring guy. And you think I went to Mexico or I know somebody in Mexico? I said, Frank, you can look at my phone records. I've never called Mexico. I've never been to Mexico except one time when I was the bodyguard of the FBI director. Louis Freeh went over to see mass graves that were uncovered there.
In Juarez?
Yep. He flew into El Paso. The hostage rescue team comes with him, and they said, hey, we need SWAT guys to drive the cars because you guys know the area. I thought, I don't speak the language, and I've never been to Mexico. I don't know how to drive over there. And they're like, Shipley, you're driving the car. I was like, oh, great. That's the only time I'd ever been to Mexico.
What's the importance of them? What's the importance of them utilizing that search warrant as opposed to getting permission from you? Is that for legal purposes?
Well, so now I'm a licensed attorney. After I got out of prison, I was angry, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to law school, and now I'm going to be a defense attorney, and I'm going to protect people from bullies. Using the fact that they have more money. Like the federal government, when they come after you, they have millions of dollars to prosecute you. Now, and Gary can tell you this, if the NRA didn't give me $40,000 to put towards my legal defense, we would have lost our home. My wife and I, because when you're a federal agent, they say, okay, you're on leave without pay and you cannot take another job. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, how do I support my family? They're like, we don't care.
That's your problem.
We don't care at all. And so that's a tremendous pressure. So they don't play fair. Gary can tell you that.
This portion of the podcast is brought to you by Mobilize Beast. If you're in need of a sports massage therapist in the San Antonio area, go see my buddy Ryan Harness at Mobilize Beast. You can find him on Instagram at Mobilize Beast. This is not your average foo-foo massage. Ryan is going to make it hurt oh so good. So if you're in need of a sports massage therapist in San Antonio, hit up Ryan at Mobilize Beast.
The government's standpoint is if they can't win, they'll keep on moving until you're broke. It's like what they did to Bernard Carrick. You know who Bernard Carrick is? He was before the police commissioner of the NYPD.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So Bernard Carrick's a millionaire. Bernard Carrick at the time had a company, and he was building prisons in Jordan. He was a Secretary of the Interior.
That's right.
Right. He was making $1 million a week. Bernard Carrick had to take a plea deal after 2.5 years of this going on because he says, I would have nothing left because the federal government has endless pockets.
So they'll just wait you out.
They will bury you financially until you have nothing.
And so that's what they tried to do to me. They put me on leave without pay in 2007. And all of a sudden I'm like, my wife's an echocardiographer. She does ultrasound of the heart. She makes good money. I was an FBI agent.
I might need a number.
Trust me, during this trial, there were several times I looked at her and I said, honey, I think I'm dying. And she's like, you're not. You're okay. But I was an FBI agent. I made $120,000 a year. We had no kids at the time.
Okay, I was going to say, at the time, you all hadn't adopted your children. So
we adopted my daughter in 2004.
Okay.
So the guns, when they went back, it's kind of interesting how the government does this. They look at a time period and they say, this is the indictment period. They don't look at the totality of things. For instance, if you look at 1 week, they could say, well, he sold 4 guns in 1 week. But we had there's an IRS agent named Mike Wright. Mike retired. He came back to help me. I called him up and I said, hey, the ATF is coming after me. I didn't do anything wrong. I need help. I'll never forget this. Mike Wright said to me, John, if I come down there to El Paso and I look through your documents and I see that you broke the law, I'm out. We're friends, but I will never do that for anyone. And I said, Mike, I would expect nothing less from you. And he came down. He did a forensic analysis of all the records. He looked at everything. And he said, John, they're trying to say you acted as an unlicensed gun dealer. You sold 0.3 guns a month. I said, Mike, I'm not a math guy. What does that mean? What does that mean? And he goes, that means you would buy or sell one gun in a 3-month period. He goes, there is no licensed dealer anywhere in the United States that sells .3 guns a month. They'd be out of business.
Right.
And he said, and they definitely don't sell it for a loss.
Right.
So,
and I guess that's another thing I wanted to ask you, were your charges. I was going through some of this other stuff, and the charges were for, was it for selling the gun, or was it for
No.
the
No,
FFA or FFL deal?
they started and they told me, we're gonna arrest you for trafficking weapons to Mexico. I said, well, giddy up, because I don't speak Spanish. I don't know anyone in Mexico.
And again, it was only one gun that they
It
found.
was one firearm that went to Mexico. And if anybody knows El Paso is here, and right next to it is Juarez. I mean, literally, if you shoot from the FBI building on Mesa Hills, if you take your pistol out and you fire, that bullet will land in Mexico. That's how close it is.
Yeah.
And for me to live there for 14 years and one gun goes across there, I was surprised it wasn't more. Now, the ATF did an exhaustive investigation, and they went and looked at every firearm I ever owned my entire life. They looked for, did John sell to somebody who was prohibited? They looked at all of them? No. They went and they said, straw purchaser? No. Used in a crime? No. There was one gun that I sold to Armando Rodriguez, the deputy sheriff, that he put on consignment that they sold to a gun trafficker, and that's how it ended up in Mexico. And all of a sudden, I'm the bad guy. So when they initially came to me and said, hey, trafficking firearms to Mexico, I laughed and said, I'll see you in court. And I mean, I literally laughed.
Sure.
Then they changed everything up. They came back and said, well, that won't work, so let's see what we can throw on the wall and see what sticks.
Yep.
So what they did was they said, we're going to charge you with dealing firearms without a license. Well, I read the statute, and the statute says that you have to do it with the principal objective of livelihood and profit. I didn't make a profit. I lost money. And second of all, I never claimed it on my taxes as a business or anything else because I lost money and I wasn't doing it with the objective of selling firearms for profit. I did it with increasing my collection. I don't like the way this gun shoots. I want a better gun that shoots better. Sure. Or, hey, this one has the new optics out on it. I'm going to sell the old one and get this one. Gun collectors are always trying to improve their collection.
Let me just say something off topic right now. Not off topic, but let me just say something to folks that don't quite understand this. If I get online and I fall in love with a gun, which I happen to, the 6-hour MPX, and I absolutely love it, there's not a lot of places that I can go to shoot that gun to see if I like it or see if it functions well.
No.
I have to buy it and then go shoot it and go, man, I hate this gun. Let me do some research, and maybe there's a different version of this gun that I'm going to like better. And so for folks who don't understand, it's not like going and trying on shoes at Academy. You might be able to find some guns at a gun store or a rifle range that'll let you practice and shoot them. But certain guns, and especially if you're a gun guy and you do a lot of research and you know what you like, you're not going to find that gun to have fun with unless you go to someplace like Vegas, right? And most people aren't going to make that trip to shoot that gun. They're going to buy it and go shoot it at their ranch and realize they don't like the way it functions.
So to speak on that, I started off with a 50 caliber. I won't name who made it, but it was not accurate and it wasn't a lot of fun to shoot. It actually hurt to shoot the gun. And I had a friend named John Hubert. John was a retired Border Patrol agent, and he worked at a gun store in El Paso, not the one that was involved in my case. Great guy, super tactical guy. You would want him with you anywhere in a firefight because he was an absolute stud, and his wife was just as much of a stud.
Well, he was a Border Patrol agent, of course.
Yeah, there you go. So
It's most of them.
I'm going to say all of them. I love those guys. There's more times Border Patrol agents saved my butt because they were somewhere and all of a sudden they'd show up and you'd be like, oh, thank God, man.
Yeah.
I'm telling you this, if you work on the border, ICE and Border Patrol are two of your best assets. As an FBI agent, more times than not, those guys would save an investigation or save a case or saved my butt because I didn't see somebody coming up and they have him in custody already. And so great respect for them.
Those folks are out there all the time.
Yeah, they are.
You know? And when you take and I'm just making assumptions here because I work in a cubicle, but when you take somebody who maybe is in the FBI, I would imagine you guys aren't typically in the dirt and in the brush.
No,
you know,
we're in a
and
cubicle.
those folks are always in the dirt.
We're in a
brush.
cubicle, and those guys are out pounding the pavement and the dirt and the.
Not to get off topic again, but I always say this when I do podcasts, and it's like, with all respect to other federal agencies, police officers, deputies, state troopers, and all that, when they roll up to a scene and there's 5 or 6 guys, they're calling for backup. You know, I need more agents, I need more officers, I need more deputies, send me a backup. You get a Border Patrol agent, there's 40, 50 people out there, it's like, all right, all of you on the ground.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. You know, it's funny, my aunt used to be in charge of, I guess, the Del Rio sector.
Yeah.
And I asked her one day, I said, what did you guys do when you were out in the middle of nowhere at night and there's 1 or 2 of you and you've encountered 40 people? And she said, lie your ass off. You make it sound like you're 20 people and it's just you.
Yeah.
You take control of the situation.
Yeah.
So, what did they call the Border Patrol in Spanish?
La migra.
La migra. Okay. So when I first got to El Paso, you can see I'm obviously white. I don't speak Spanish. And we went out one time, and there were a bunch of illegals that were coming across, and we could see they had drugs. And somebody yells, DEA, stop, FBI, stop. These guys didn't stop at all. Somebody goes, La migra. And they're like, La migra. It just went crazy because they were afraid of the Border Patrol. They knew the Border Patrol, they don't play around.
It's a reputation, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been around for a long time.
And I'll tell you this, if you're a Border Patrol agent, you're a stud because you're out there by yourself. You don't have backup close by. And you know, I had a friend that was a trooper, and he said, on the road, I am God. Well, on the Border Patrol agents are gods because they command that, you know.
Presence.
And they learn that at their academy. Their academy is just like going through boot camp in the military. It is tough.
It's very paramilitary.
Hard. It is. Yeah. It's very regulated. But getting
right,
back to that 50 cal.
Yes.
So what I wanted to say was the first 50 cal I bought, I didn't like. And so I sold it and I bought something different. And then finally, John Hubert came to me. He said, John, have you ever shot a Barrett? And I said, I don't think I have. And he said, well, it doesn't recoil any more than a 12 gauge shotgun. I said, that's impossible. So we went out to a canyon that was deserted, and he had a Barrett 82A1 semi-automatic 10 round 50 caliber. And he shot that thing and the sound reverberated off the rock. And I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, I've flown helicopters. I've done a lot of cool things, but that gun is just a beast. And I was like, I want one. He's like, but they're expensive. They're like 10 grand. I was like, I'll save my pennies because I wanted one ever since he shot that. And that's, you know, if you look back through my gun collection, you can see, okay, here's a cheap 50 cal. Here's a little bit better. Here's a little bit better. And I stepped things up each time I bought a different model or different accoutrements. Whether it's a Leupold scope or a Night Force or whatever it was, I bought different gear to try and make it better.
And quality gear is not cheap.
No.
Is that Barrett Light 50?
No, it's the
82A1?
It's the big boy.
Yeah.
It's semi-auto, but it shoots like a dream. Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
So part of the charges were the trafficking firearms.
No, so they never charged me with that. Yeah.
Right. And so it was
dealing firearms
without a license.
Yes, sir.
Which, like you said a minute ago, they had to, I guess somehow they proved that you were doing that as a means of income, right? And is that the difference for folks? Like, if I sit there and I read that and I go, well, what if I sold a gun? I guess if you're doing what we talked about, you're not doing it as a means of income. And they were trying to prove that you were doing it as a means of income.
And so the government's argument was, well, we agree that's not his income, but it's supplemental income. Well, it says that it doesn't say anything like that in the statute.
Right.
But you know what? The prosecutors sell it like that's the law.
Right.
And the jury, they don't know better.
Nope.
They look at a federal prosecutor and they say, that guy knows the law, and they're here from the government. And if he says it's supplemental income, well, then supplemental income's good enough.
Also, it was causing a firearms dealer to maintain false records. What was that?
Okay, so what they're alleging there is when you go into a firearms dealer and you want to buy a gun, you have to give them an ID. They have to do a background check on you, and you have to fill out Form 4473 from the ATF. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Yes or no? Have you ever this? Have you ever that? And if you lie on that form, that's a felony.
Yep.
Okay. So that form is what they're saying I caused that gun store owner to maintain a false one. And here's what they alleged. They said, John would sometimes buy a gun and he wasn't going to keep it for the rest of his life. So therefore, he knew he was going to sell it to somebody else, and he put down that he is the actual buyer of the firearm.
Right. That's on that document that we filled out.
Yes, it says, are you the actual buyer of the firearm? Now, what we argued is this. I used to go on to different gun websites, Gun Broker, Auction Arms, and I would look at guns, and I knew what I liked, and I would wait till I found one at the right price, and then I'd bid on it. And if I won it, I would go down to the gun store, get a copy of their FFL, and I would send a money order in the FFL to that gun store owner.
And they ship it to that FFL.
They didn't ship it to me.
Right.
They shipped it to that gun store in El Paso, and then I had to go in and fill out a 4473. Mm-hmm. Well, what they said was, if you ever planned on reselling that gun to somebody else, then you're not the actual buyer. And my attorney's like, no, he is the actual buyer. He bid on the gun on the site. He won the gun on the site. He sent his money, he sent the FFL, he filled out the 4473, and he passed the background check.
So it amazes me that they got that to stick, because there's a difference between buyer and there's a difference between buyer and owner.
Sure.
Right? So
I tell my clients this all the time. They come to me and they say, John, you've got to defend me. The police arrested me. There were drugs in the car, but they weren't my drugs. They were his drugs. And I'm like, well, where'd they find them? In my pocket. But they didn't belong to me. Well, you're in possession. They don't have to prove ownership. They have to prove possession. Mm-hmm. Look, right now as I sit, I'm a convicted felon. If I take Gary's gun, we both agree that gun belongs to Gary, but I'm in possession of it, and I violated the law. Mm-hmm. So it's not ownership, it's possession.
Mm-hmm. That's very shocking, because when you talk about legalities and formalities and meanings of words, again, I'm not the sharpest guy, but buyer and owner are two different things, right? Sure. If Gary wants a T-shirt from Sears, is Sears still open, or am I showing my age?
Yeah.
I can go buy Gary this shirt, but I'm not the owner of the shirt. Now that's different. They don't want me to take Amanda to the gun store, buy the gun, and hand it to Amanda, right? That's because the intent was never for me to own that; it was for her, right? So I can see how that would be an issue. But I go buy a gun, shoot it for 2 or 3 years, shoot it for 6 months, and decide I don't like this gun. And Gary goes, "Man, I need a gun I want to keep in the kitchen of the house. Well, here, I'll sell it to you cheap."
Yeah.
I had no intention to ever sell Gary that gun until I decided I didn't want it anymore.
And gun guys, a lot of times, Gary will go to the gun store with me, and we walk in, and he buys something, and I go, dude, I like that gun. I really like it. Hey, Gary, if you ever decide you want to sell that, sell it to me. And he's like, all right, that's cool. Well, now the ATF is saying, well, if you said that before he actually filled out the form, then he's not the actual buyer. Ridiculous.
Right.
I'll tell you the other word, like they play games. The ATF plays games with words, and they use them against you. Occasional. The statute says that private citizens, myself, Gary, you, we're allowed to make occasional gun sales. So let's talk about the word occasional. I'm an attorney now. So if you say, how often do you have marital relations with your wife? And Gary says, occasionally. And John says, no.
Occasionally.
How about with your own wife? And John says occasional, and Gabe says occasional. Now, Gabe, what does occasional mean to you? Well, it means once a week we have marital relationships.
We're Catholic, so technically it's once a year, like going to church on Christmas.
Right.
Yeah.
Gary, what does it mean to you? 3 times a week. John, what does it mean to you? Once a month. We all said occasional, but we have very different definitions of what that means. So when the government said he's made more than occasional sales, I sold 0.3 guns a month. That means I would sell 1 gun every 3 months, and they're saying that's too much. Well, who decides that? The jury.
One thing that kind of bothers me is I like structure, right? I like, not to compare what I do to what you do, but I work in an engineering firm, right? We've got code books. And these code books, they have dictionary in there, right? And every word in there has a description of what it is. And two words might be similar, but there's a little bit difference in there. But the good thing is, when I use that word and somebody questions it, I can go to that book and say, look, this is what this word means. And we both agree because here's a standard, right? Here's a written standard of what that word actually means. And it blows my mind that when you talk about the law and you talk about charges and you talk about going to court and you talk about people's livelihoods, how easy it is for whoever's prosecuting or whoever the judge is to interpret certain words a certain way. And it bothers me that when it comes to designing plumbing systems in commercial buildings, we have more structure in the terminology or the language that we use. There's more structure there than there is in the law. And that scares me because there's not a potential of me going to prison doing what I do. But when it comes to doing what you do, as far as the law goes and go in court, they're just playing loose and fast with words, right? And who can convince a jury that my interpretation of this word is more accurate than Gary's interpretation of this word? And that's scary to me because that can happen to anybody. This portion of the podcast is brought to you by The Modern Movement. Go see my buddy, Justin Reyna. He's a chiropractor at The Modern Movement. They specialize in rehabilitation, chiropractic, fitness, and soft tissue care. To book an appointment, go to newarrowwellnesscenter.com. They're out of San Antonio area, and the good folks over there get you taken care of.
Well, and when Frank testified, they asked him a question about occasional gun sales and all this, and he knew he had no ground to stand on. So you know what he did? He said, well, that's not for me to decide. That's for a jury to decide. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you're an ATF agent. You're supposed to be an expert in firearms. Let me just tell you this. In case you've never been to federal court, it's very structured. It's very quiet in there. It's not like state court. I operate in state court every single day now as a defense attorney. In federal court, it's very quiet and all this stuff. So we have an ATF agent. He walks over. They put the guns from my house, they put them out on a table so it looks like an arsenal to the jury. Look at all these guns that Mr. Shipley had in his house. Oh my gosh, oh. The ATF agent walks over and he picks up one rifle and he holds it up. And he said, this is a .308 sniper rifle. In the hands of Agent Shipley, he can kill you at 1,000 yards with this gun. And I leaned over to my attorney. I said, hey, mark that piece of evidence. He goes, what? I said, mark that piece of evidence. He goes, John, you're not an attorney. Shut up. And I said, that is not a .308. I said, that is my 25-06 Coyote gun. It won't shoot past 300 yards. So get that ATF agent to mark that piece of evidence and then question him on it. Hand him the gun. Show him on the barrel where it's stamped 25-06 and not .308. Make the jury know that he is an idiot and he's up here testifying as an expert and he doesn't even know what he's talking about.
Right.
And my attorney turned to me and says, John, you're not an attorney. Just be quiet and sit there.
Mine did the same thing.
And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Gabe, I can't tell you. When I was lucky enough when I got out of prison. I went to prison for 2 years, 3 years on probation. Got off probation, I went to law school. I went to Knoxville, Tennessee, to LMU Law. And I met with Gary Wade. Now, Dean Wade is Judge Wade to everybody. He was the former Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court. And when I walked into his office and I sat down with him, he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, why should I let a convicted felon come to my law school? I said, because I didn't do it. He said, then why are you here? And I said, because I want to fight. And I want people to know that what they labeled me as is not me. I didn't do those things. I didn't deserve that. I paid a debt that I didn't owe because there were a bunch of people lying to cover up. And I said, I want to become a defense attorney and I want to fight for people. And Judge Wade looked at me and he said, John, I reread your entire case on Pacer, which is it's a database that holds all the federal cases. He said, I was the Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court and I've seen a lot of BS, but I've never seen it this thick. He said, you're going to come to our law school. You're going to graduate our law school and you're going to do good things. I forever owe that man because there were so many law schools that said to me, hey, your grades are good. Your LSAT score is good. The fact that you were a federal agent for 14 years and an officer in the military, you're a 100% disabled veteran, you have all these things going for you, but you're a felon. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to tell you something else about that name of being a convicted felon. To some people, they don't care about that. But to men like Gary and I, that's an absolute insult on our integrity. I have to live with that every single day until the president either signs my pardon or I die. When I go to work, I feel like a liar because I don't walk up to people and say, "Hi, I'm John Shipley. I'm a convicted felon." I walk up to them and I say, "Hey, I'm John Shipley. I'm the defense attorney on this case." The judge doesn't know I'm a convicted felon. Bailiffs don't know. They know I'm a former FBI agent, but they don't know that I'm a convicted felon. Now, the day is coming when they find that out, and I'm okay with that because I know what I've done and what I haven't done. But I feel like I'm living a lie because those men and women, like the bailiffs know, if a prisoner gets out of line and starts choking one of them, I'm coming to fight that guy to the death. I will never let an officer, whether I have a badge in my pocket or not, I will never let an officer be killed if I'm in that room. You're going to kill me too. You're going to have to. No matter how old I am, I'm 55, I'm disabled, I had a spinal cord injury in the Army, and I don't have full use of my left leg, but you're going to have to walk over my dead body if you want to hurt Gary, because he's my brother. But I feel like I'm living a lie because I can't tell everybody. I'm in a jury trial in Tennessee. There's an officer on the stand, and I'm cross-examining him. And I walk up to him, and I said, "Officer, how long have you been on the force? Are you sure that you did this correctly?" I'm basically baiting him into where I want him to go. And I said, "You've written reports, haven't you?" He goes, "Thousands of reports." I said, "You check them for accuracy?" "Oh, absolutely." "You check this one for accuracy?" 100%. So everything that's in your report is correct. And the judge can just see me, baiting him in. He goes, "It's absolutely correct." And I said, "So, officer, the serial number on this gun is super important to your investigation, isn't it?" He goes, "Yes, sir." I said, "So if the serial number on your report was wrong, then maybe this piece of evidence isn't the correct gun. Maybe this is wrong. It brings a lot more doubt into this." He's like, "Yes, sir." I knew I had him because the serial number he put in his report was not the serial number on State's Exhibit number 1. So I walked over and I reached down and I stopped. My whole body started sweating out of every pore that I had because I knew if I touched that gun just to hand it to the witness, I was felon in possession of a firearm. So I walked over to my partner, Marcus. He was the attorney that I worked for in Tennessee.
That's heavy.
And I said, "Marcus, I need you to hand that gun to the witness." And the judge says, "What's going on here?" I said, "Your Honor, just 1 second, please." He's like, "Okay." I said, "Marcus, go hand the gun, State's Exhibit 1, to the witness." "I can't touch a firearm. I'm a convicted felon." Well, Marcus knew. He hired me, and I told him. He's like, "Oh, my God, John, you're right." And he walked over and he handed it to him. And the judge is looking at us like we're crazy. But still to this day, if I'm in a trial and there's a firearm, I can't inspect the firearm. I can't touch the firearm. If I put my finger on one round of ammunition, I've broken the law. And I won't ever do that.
Sure.
So it's something that I have to live with every single day that I don't deserve. And people ask me, "Why are you going for a presidential pardon?" Because I don't deserve to have that every day. When I went to law school, I called 47 apartment complexes and said, "I would like to live in your apartment complex." And they said, "Okay, we don't take convicted felons." So people would tell me, "Well, just lie on your application." I'm like, "You want me to lie? You want me to take a job of integrity, which is being an attorney or being an FBI agent or being an officer, and you want me to lie to get it? I'm not doing that."
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question on these charges.
Yeah.
I guess the last one was let's see, maintaining false records and one
false
count
statements.
False statements to federal authorities. What was that they were accusing you of?
So Frank, he came to me when I got back from Dallas. He said, "Hey, can I take a look at your records?" I said, "Sure." So I said, "When I get back to Dallas, I'll call you." So I called him up. It was Good Friday, right before Easter. My daughter had to have an emergency surgery She nearly died. She had what's called an intussusception of the bowel. It's where the bowel telescopes back over itself, and it blocks up, and then it will rupture, and then they will have sepsis and all these issues. And again, I'm not a doctor, but that's what I was told. And so my wife actually saved our daughter's life by scanning her. She does ultrasound, and she scanned my daughter and said, oh my gosh, she has this. And anyway, we're getting ready for Good Friday. We're going to church. We're doing everything. And Frank calls me up and says, John, I need those documents. And I was like, man, I'm busy. And he's like, no, I really need them. It's super important. Well, as Gary can tell you, if an agent calls you at 5 o'clock on a Friday and says he needs something big is going on, and he needs it. So as an FBI agent, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I told my wife, hey, I'll take Jack with me. I'm going to run down to the gym. I'm going to give some documents to Frank, and then I'll come back. You take care of Kelly. So I sit down at my kitchen table, and he wants to meet me in about an hour. And I pull out my book, and he said, hey, I need to know what guns you sold to Armando.
And this is that book you were describing earlier,
Yes.
where you keep track.
Yeah, the A&D book.
A&D.
So I said, okay, I'll meet you down there. When do you need to meet? He goes, meet me at 6 o'clock down by the gym, by your house. And I said, okay. So I went, and back in those days, I didn't have a printer or a scanner or a copy machine or anything in my house. I could have driven to the FBI office, but that was about 30 minutes away, and then 30 minutes back, I'd have missed the meeting. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to write down all the information that's in my book that's important. So I started looking at it, and I thought, you know what? If I sold to somebody else, maybe Frank knows of another target, but he hasn't told me their name yet. And maybe it's one of these other guys that I had sold a gun to. So maybe that's important. So I sat down, and I transcribed every gun from my book into a second book. And I started writing them down. Well, when I got to my grandpa's guns, I said, well, he doesn't care about my grandfather's guns. They're out there in my gun safe. They're from Indiana. They have nothing to do with a Mexican gun trafficking investigation.
They were more so hunting rifles and things of that nature?
It's like a 22 and a 30-06 and a shotgun. They're just, and they were, when I say they're old, they were made in the 1930s and 40s, and they were all rusted up, and you couldn't even fire them. But the reason I loved them is they were my grandpa's.
Sure.
And this is crazy, but I don't know if any of your listeners ever had this happen. Those guns smelled like my grandpa because he kept them in his closet. And I don't know how to explain that to anybody else. Like if you said, I'll give you $1 million for your grandpa's guns, keep your money. I want us to be able to smell my grandpa because he's gone. I'm sorry. So those had meaning to me.
Right.
And so I didn't put those into the book that I gave Frank because I knew they weren't involved and I was pressed for time. So what he alleged was I lied to a federal agent by not providing the information about my grandpa's guns. And then when they came and did a search warrant, they found my book, and then they're like, oh, he gave us a false book to throw us off his trail. What? On 9 guns or 10 guns or 19 guns or whatever it was that belonged to my grandpa? I mean, that's ridiculous. And he's like, that's a false statement. I was like, Gary and I are both been federal agents. We know what section 1001 is, and we know what a false statement is. A false statement is not, for instance, if Frank Henderson would have said to me, hey, what'd you eat for breakfast? And I said, I had Cheerios. You actually had Fruit Loops. That is not a false statement to a federal agent. Is it wrong? Yes, but would not qualify as a false statement to a federal agent. But he's saying if you tell us anything and it's not 100% accurate, that's a false statement.
It's the loophole that they use.
Yeah. and I guess depending on the attorney or the prosecuting attorney, it's just a matter of convincing the jury that they're correct.
Yes.
You know,
That's all it is.
That you omitting your grandfather's guns, you know, not maliciously or trying to do it to deceive anybody, an attorney can spin that into you're hiding something.
Well, the other thing that he alleges is that he says that when we met at the gym, he asked me, are these all of your gun purchases? And he never said that to me. That is an outright lie. I'll put my hand on God's Bible and swear to that.
Right.
And the reason I know that's a lie is if he would have said that, remember when I told you I was in the military, I used to put all my guns on my computer and it crashed and I couldn't get the server back up and I couldn't recover that data. Well, in my gun book, I wrote down those guns, like what I thought I had back in the military, and then I put date of purchase like 1996, because that's when I joined the FBI, and I thought, well, I got out of the Army in 96, so I'm just going to put that date because I don't know when I actually disposed of those weapons. I don't know their serial numbers.
To the best of my knowledge.
To the best of my knowledge, I wrote them down because some of them were still in my gun safe. Most of them weren't because I'd moved on. And when you start making money, like when you're a soldier, you don't make much money. So you can't buy a Sig Sauer.
You were an officer.
You
made the money.
It doesn't matter. But
when you're enlisted, you don't make money.
Gary, once again, is 100% correct. You make a little.
Gary's been through this process.
Yeah.
Well, and it didn't hurt having flight pay too.
That's nice.
So I give you that. But you know what you bought when you were a second lieutenant in the Army versus a federal agent making 100 plus, they're going to be different. Sure. You're going to have different cars. You're going to have different guns. You're going to live in a different house because you're making a different income.
You know, that's a good point on cars, because when I think about it myself, if I sit back and think about all the vehicles that I've owned and when did I own them, and if it's critical for me to remember that, I'm sure I'm going to miss a car, and I'm sure I'm going to be a couple of years off on when I own those things.
Or how much you sold them for.
Right.
You know, you're like, gosh, like my wife had a Kia Telluride. We just sold it and we bought her another car. And I said, honey, how much did we pay for that Kia? And she's like, I think it was like $30,000. And I went and I looked and it was 42. And I was like, we're off by 12 grand.
That's a false statement.
Yeah, exactly.
well, I mean, when you talk about it in this arena and with all this going on, that's how that works.
Yeah.
You know, there's times where I'll have conversations with friends and be like, hey, remember 2 years ago when we went to whatever we did? And they're like, dude, that was 5 years ago. You know, and I honestly believed it was 2. You know, so it's important for folks. One thing that I want people to understand is something like this literally can happen to anybody. And I think a lot of, and I'm going to just speak to like gun owners, a lot of us, I have no clue when I bought my guns. You know, I'll take pictures of them. I'll take pictures of the serial numbers. I'll try and keep track that way. I'm not doing a great job of it. But I couldn't tell you how much I paid for them. I couldn't tell you when I bought them. I couldn't tell you where I bought them.
So, you know, you would think that the ATF, instead of going after people who keep good records, would be like, hey, we're glad you're doing that because that helps our investigations. But instead, they did the opposite. And you always have to think, what are you sending out into the world? What is the message that people get from this? Well, the message is, don't keep records on your guns, because if you do, the ATF will come in and they'll twist it and use it against you. But it's the very thing that they need to actually go after the bad guys.
Right.
So on one hand, as a responsible gun owner, you think I should keep records because I want to help the ATF go after bad guys. But I also want to protect myself because I'm not doing anything illegal, and you don't have to do something illegal to go to jail.
Yeah.
Right.
I have clients that have gone to jail when I knew they were innocent. And if you ask me about O.J. Simpson, I think he killed those people. Was he found guilty? No. But what's the truth? You know, the problem I have with the justice system is everybody wants to win. It's all about winning. It's not about the truth. Well, what is the truth? John Shipley served this country honorably for 18 years, 4 in the Army and 14 in the FBI. He did not deserve this. The government had an illegal operation going on, and I didn't find out about it until after I was convicted, until Brian was killed. Mm-hmm. And when Brian was killed, I was sitting in prison, FCI Inglewood in Colorado, and my attorney calls me. He says, John, I got good news. I was like, well, I could use some.
I know the feeling.
Oh, no. You're talking like Gary now.
I know the feeling.
So I said, what is it? And he goes, this is big. I was like, what? And he goes, a Border Patrol agent in Arizona named Brian Terry was shot and killed while on duty. And I wanted to go through that phone, and I wanted to pummel him and beat his ass. Excuse me. And I was like, a Border Patrol agent got killed, and that's good news? And he says, no, that's horrible news. but he got shot with a gun that's linked up to an ATF operation where they're letting guns go into Mexico. I said, Leon, what the hell are you talking about? The ATF would never let guns go to Mexico. Their job is to stop the illegal flow of guns. That's absolutely 180 degrees divergent from their mission. That's like saying the FBI is blowing up buildings and flying planes into stuff. We're here to stop terrorism, not promote it,
Right.
not to do it. So why would the ATF do that? I said, Leon, you're wrong. He said, no, John. He goes, I'm talking high-level stuff. There was a Border Patrol agent killed with a gun, and the gun was sold by the ATF, walked across Mexico, and it's not just that one gun, it's thousands of guns. And I said, Leon, I don't know where you're getting your information, but you're not right. And he goes, I am. And your gun was sold by an ATF informant in the same manner and walked across the border by somebody they had under investigation. Now, they can't even deny that anymore because now it came out in a press release from ICE that the ATF had Jonathan Lopez, the gun trafficker, under investigation. And in the indictment, they talk about how many years they'd been watching him take guns across the border. I mean, it's like the ATF shoots themselves in the foot.
So let me ask you this. When that happened, you're already in prison.
Yep.
And this is just me not knowing. But there's not any legal avenue for them to revisit your case? Or is it, hey, you're convicted, you're in, you're doing your time, now this drops, and you're screwed because we can't revisit it?
And here's the crazy thing. When you go to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, my attorney, I know this now because I'm a licensed attorney, but I didn't know this at the time because I was just a convict sitting in a prison cell. He said, John, what happened at your trial? Think of everything that happened, the witnesses, the testimony, the transcript, everything else. That's in a box, and that's all you're allowed to consider for the appeal. They can't, now that we know about Fast and Furious and we have a receipt that shows that the gun store owner sold it to a known gun trafficker from Mexico.
Doesn't matter.
None of that matters. I said, but it's
Can't
the truth.
present any additional evidence.
Really?
But it's the truth. And he said, John, this isn't about the truth. I'm sorry. And I was like,
You're appealing that case, which is now
and
in that box, like you said.
And I remember saying to Leon, so are you going to get me out of prison early because now the truth is out there? And he says, no, you're going to do your full 2 years. You're going to be on probation for 3. He said, you'll be lucky if you get this overturned like when you're 60. I was like, what?
Where's the good news?
Yeah. He said, but we found out that you didn't do it. I said, heck, I already knew that. I knew I didn't do it.
You know what always bothers me, and I'm naive for thinking this way. I get it, but when you think about so many things that federal agencies do that they get wrong, and you know what, I get that there's people are doing this and people are running it and mistakes get made. I get that, but when you find that they were doing what they were doing with Fast and Furious, they were letting guns go into Mexico, they're losing track of them. Guns are used to kill Officer Terry. Guns are used in Benghazi that kill Americans over there. And I'm sure people that live there, you think about all the crime in Mexico. And this is where I get weird and get a little, sensitive to it. As I think about all those poor people in Mexico that have to deal with all this fucking violence that goes on in Mexico all the time. And now the strongest country on the planet is letting guns come into my town.
Yeah.
Down in Mexico,
they're feeding
these poor people. They can't catch a fucking break because everything's run by assholes and drugs. And now the largest country on the planet, the richest country on the planet, is contributing to that violence. You
know what's even more disgusting than that is that we act like we're the best on the planet.
Yeah.
These politicians look, I'm 100% red-blooded American.
Sure.
My father served 23 years on active duty in the Army. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's my best friend. He taught me integrity as a young man. I'm all for America. But we need to learn when we screw something up to stand up and take responsibility for it and say, hey, you know what? We messed up Gary's life. He didn't deserve this. We need to fix it. We messed up John's life and Brian's life and Jaime's life and Benghazi. And we need to, look, when a soldier gets killed in battle, we celebrate them. When Jaime got killed, do we celebrate him?
Not at all.
No.
Not at all.
You know, and you got ATF guys that say, well, if you're going to make an omelet, you're going to have to scramble a few eggs. Are you kidding me? Are you really going to say that kind of shit when a federal agent just gave his life for this country? It was no less honorable that he died out there on the streets or in the sand or wherever it is than a soldier that's defending our country.
Sure.
And that's why so many soldiers go into law enforcement. I'm prior service. Look at how many guys go from the military where there is an esprit de corps. Soldiers.
I went one day to the next.
Yeah.
I was discharged February 22nd, 1998 from the Coast Guard. February 23rd, 10 a.m. I was swearing in. I spent 10 hours unemployed.
I got out of the Army on a Friday, and I started the academy on a Sunday. 6/23/96 is my EOD. I had one day off. And you know what? I couldn't wait for that one day to be over. I was like, God, get me to the FBI where I can make a difference for you, where I can do what's right.
It's a great feeling.
It's sure, and it's not just a job; it's a calling. You know, and I've listened to Gary talk about how he feels about this country. It's a calling. It's something that you say, God, I will give my life for this country.
You want to know how stupid we are? All right. Would you go back tomorrow?
Yes.
I'd go back and do the same thing tomorrow.
President Trump, if you're listening, give me a pardon, reinstate me, back pay me, let me work as an assistant director. Heck, put me in charge of the ATF. And then we'll start following the law because I'm a licensed attorney. I know what the law is. I didn't break the law. Reinstate me. I'll still work for the government. You know why? Because God, he only gave me this many days on this earth. And he didn't give it for me to become rich or famous or any of that. I don't want any of that crap. At the end of the road, I'm going to look God in the eyes, and he's going to say, I'm either proud of you for what you did, or I gave you gifts that you never used. That's not going to be me. I'm going to look at him and say, I served my country. I fought for what is right, and I believe that America is stronger because I believed in it and I fought for it. I don't want your son or Gary's son or my listeners' sons. I don't want them going to prison over some BS arbitrary policy stuff that's not even enforceable. Occasional gun sales? What's occasional? Well, we don't know. We're just going to let the jury decide that. You know, that'd be like a police officer. You're speeding. How fast was I going? Well, I don't have any idea how fast you're going, but I think you were going fast. We would never tolerate that in this country. That's why we have radar and laser and all these ways of gauging speed. But yet you can say you can make occasional gun sales? That's ridiculous.
You know, I told you in a conversation we had over the phone a week or two ago, and guys like you and Gary, I think not that it's been vocalized, I don't know that it has been, but one thing that I see is when I think about Gary too, I'm sure Gary has tons of regrets. But anyway, I think one of Gary's...
being on this podcast.
I think one of Gary's regrets is that he didn't get to finish his service.
Amen.
You know, and for people that are passionate about what they do and serving, you know, and that love the country and want to serve the country, and when they're not allowed to complete their service, it's something that they carry, you know, and it's a... Gary
said he's going to tell you how stupid he is. Let me tell you how stupid I am. I'm 55 years old. I'm a 100% disabled veteran. I don't have full use of my left leg. I can't run and jump and do the things I used to do. I'm not the stud that I used to think I was. If they said we're going to reinstate you, I would go. If they said to me, hey, John, go to Iraq as a sniper and spend 1 year over there protecting our soldiers, I would go. I would not just go, I would jump at it. 100%, I would go through any door to be back where I was because I loved working for the FBI. I love thinking that I'm making this country better and safer. The whole reason I went into law enforcement was I had a girlfriend that got raped, and I was young when it happened. And I remember thinking, if you want to do that to a woman, you're going to have to step over my dead body. You're going to have to kill me because I will not let you do that to somebody. And that's a calling. That's God saying to you, son, I'm going to let you go through this. because there's glory at the end of it. You're going to be a protector. You're going to be a sheepdog. When I got into the FBI, they had this little plaque, and it said, there's 3 types of people on this earth. There are sheep. They go through the earth timidly, just doing their business, never hurting another soul. They just want peace. And then there are wolves. And wolves prey relentlessly upon the sheep. They slaughter them. They destroy them for their own gain. And then there are sheepdogs. And sheepdogs are capable of the same level of violence as a wolf, but would never use them inappropriately or against sheep. And then it said, what are you? I knew that day I was a protector. You know, my pastor said this to me when I was in Georgia. So we left El Paso because I had a death threat. And the guy that threatened me, I had put him in prison, and he was out, and I was out of prison. And I was out of the halfway house, and I was on probation in El Paso, Texas. Former FBI agent, have to go to my old office to report to my probation officer. Humiliating. Mm-hmm. So I get a death threat from a guy, and he says to me, John, I know you. You're a rule follower. You can't carry a gun, so you don't have a gun. But me, I'm not a rule follower. And you and I, we're going to see each other again. And I told him, bring it. Give me everything you got. I'm never going to back down. So I went to my wife and I told her. And she's like, we're out of here. Well, in case you didn't know, my wife's in charge of my house. I just live there. And she is my very best friend. We've been married almost 30 years. She's stood by me the entire time. Can never thank her enough. I said, okay, where are we going? She said, Georgia. I said, let's go. We go to Georgia. I show up. I meet my pastor at my new church. And I go in and I say, Pastor, I need to talk to you. He said, okay. I said, listen, I was in the military. I was a helicopter pilot. I was FBI. I've done a couple things. And then I got convicted of 6 felonies that I didn't do. And I'm a convicted felon and can't work anywhere. Can't find a job at Walmart. I can't do anything. He said, okay. And I said, I just want you to know, in case anybody tells you, like they read on the internet or something else, I want you to know the truth. I never did those things. Excuse me. And he says, okay, John. He goes, I've got a question for you. He said, I don't have any problem with any of that. He goes, but let's say one Sunday we're in here in the congregation and somebody breaks in through that side door and takes a rifle and starts shooting at the congregation. He goes, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to push my wife and my kids to the ground, and I'm going to attack. I'm going to go straight at that guy. And if he puts 10 rounds into my chest, that's 10 rounds that aren't going into these people over here or these children over here. And I'll go to heaven, and I'll know that I did my duty. And he said, okay. He goes, that's what I thought you were going to say. But don't get in my way because I've always got my gun on in service. He says, let me get a few shots at him first.
I was gonna say, John, what are you gonna do when you get to the guy? He's got a gun, you can't touch it.
Yeah, it's illegal. So
that's hysterical.
You're pursuing a pardon.
Yes, sir.
How long have you been pursuing the pardon? I saw your document the other day, and I don't remember the date on it, but how long have you been pursuing this pardon?
So I started this pardon when we lived in Georgia.
Okay.
And it was President Trump's first term, and I sent it up there, and I was,
Was that 2016, I think?
Yeah, I think that was because I think I got off probation in 2015.
Okay.
So sometimes God puts people in your path, and you don't understand it at the time, but later you look back and say, man, thank you for Gary. Thank you for, Gabe. Thank you for, well, he put me in touch. I don't know how I got there, but to a former congressman named Bob Barr. And Bob was a congressman, and he was, besides being a congressman, he was also an attorney, and he was a United States attorney, and is very intelligent about the Second Amendment, and just an all-around great person. And somebody said, you need to talk to this guy. I thought, well, I got nothing to lose. So went to talk to him, and he said, John, this is horrible. You didn't break the law. I said, I know, sir. And he said, well, I'm going to do everything I can to help you. He said, listen, I'm a former congressman, so I know Congressman Loudermilk, Barry Loudermilk, who was one of my representatives. He said, I'm going to talk to him about your case and everything else. And he goes, are you submitting a presidential pardon? I said, yes, sir. He said, I'll look it over for you. I said, sir, I can't afford you. And he said, no, I'll do it for free. Attorneys don't do stuff for free. I mean, unless they have to. So I was like, thanks. So he helps me write it because I hadn't gone to law school yet. I'm still just a convicted felon, not worth a nickel. And he takes time out of his life and he helps me in everything else. Bob Barr has now been elected as the president of the NRA. I didn't know that. And so President Trump, I had heard from Kent Terry, Brian Terry's brother, who's an outstanding, great guy. Kent had said, hey, I've been up to talk to President Trump and I dropped your name and I'm hoping that you get that pardon signed. Well, when he didn't get reelected, it was gone. Well, I didn't know this about the pardons, and Gary probably knows a lot more than I do, but apparently when a pardon goes to the president, there's a couple things that can happen. He can sign it, he can decide not to sign it and not to take action, or he can deny it. Okay? Now, if he denies it, you have to wait a period of time before you're allowed to resubmit, and there's rules and regulations. I know that surprises most government people, but so I sent it to President Trump, and he didn't sign it. He didn't take any action on it, and I heard he was looking at it, but it didn't get signed. So then President Biden comes in, and he denies it, which requires him to read it, sign it, and say no. Now, why did President Biden say no? Well, because he was the vice president when Obama was the president. So that's his administration that did Fast and Furious, and he doesn't want to say, hey, guys, we screwed over an innocent person, sent them to prison.
And technically, I'm proving it by signing it.
Yeah.
Right.
So once that pardon was done, I had to resubmit to President Trump for his second term. I sent it to, well, I don't know whether to
It goes to the Office of the Pardon Attorney.
Yes, sir.
So let me ask you this. When you submit a pardon, is it, and this is just me not knowing, but is it like, hey, this is a group of pardons that we get for 2025. After 2025, if we didn't do anything with it, it goes away and you got to resubmit next year? Or does it sit there till somebody looks at it?
So I don't know the stat right now. When I was going through my pardon, there were about 25,000 pardons behind. All right, so when you go there,
wow, that's a bunch.
They acknowledge that they received it because they got to send you an email.
Okay.
Acknowledge that they've received it and it's been given a case number. After that, it goes to a pile where they go through the ones that they have to look at. You literally have to know somebody or have somebody to get the number pulled. Because they're 25,000 behind. I would imagine now they're about 50,000.
So the more noise you can make, so to speak,
exactly.
They'll go, hey, Gary's pardons in this stack of 25,000.
Right.
Let's go pull Gary so we can see what's going on here because there's enough noise.
I was making noise because I started my own podcast. I was on the news. I had people, when Trump was doing his rallies, I had friends that were working the rallies, like selling gifts and
vendors
Trump,
and stuff,
memorabilia and stuff. They were printing up my pardon and giving it to whoever would take it on the other side of the fence. Pam Bondi got it. Corey Lewandowski got it. Eric Trump got it. I had a Coast Guard captain who went to a book signing for Don Trump Jr. in California. He handed him a pardon. I had Border Patrol agents giving it to Secret Service when the president was on the border. I made a lot of noise. So, I mean, and that's why I got you on this podcast, because you need to start.
And Gary,
even though he's only got 3 listeners, four,
because my mom just
5 listeners.
We're up to 5.
Take it.
That counter is just ticking away.
you need to start getting the voice out there so people can know.
And you know what?
Nobody knows about this case.
And I was just the opposite. I thought, you know what? If I keep my mouth shut like a good government employee, and I send that in there, and it's all the truth, they're going to sign my pardon. And Gary was like, John, nope. If you don't make them sign the pardon, they won't. Right. The only way that they're going to is if people say, wait a second, you sent a guy that was an All-American, captain of his football team. He's ROTC in college. His father pins on his butter bars when he gets commissioned.
They don't care about none of that.
His father pins his wings on at flight school. Goes to sniper school, SWAT, SEER, all these different schools I've been to. He's a great guy. He didn't do this. that doesn't matter.
No.
It doesn't matter at all. And I was so naive to think that it did. I was like, wait, now that Fast and Furious is public record and public knowledge, they're going to know I didn't sell this gun to this guy, and they shouldn't have ever written a search warrant and lied. You know, that's the thing. The ATF lied in that search warrant. They said, we're trying to figure out how this gun got to Mexico. They knew how it got to Mexico. Their informant sold it to somebody they had under investigation.
Right.
And they watched it walk. Mm-hmm. And yet they lie in a federal search warrant under oath, and they're never held accountable. So Gary was like, John, you have to tell this story. You have to start finding people that will get this message out and get upset about this, and that's when things will start changing.
So this was the one time it was good to be a loudmouth Puerto
Amen.
Rican from New York. You know, it's
It's
interesting.
a New York to you, sir.
New York. You know, it's interesting because it's nice to hear Gary's perspective on it, because I would be like you. I would assume, hey, let me do the paperwork. Let me sit over here. I know the truth. I know what I've done. Somebody's gonna pick that up.
So
when you think about the quantity that they have to go through, you've got to make
Let
noise.
me tell you something. When I got out of the prison in 06, in 05, I got prosecuted by Johnny Sutton. You know that name?
I do.
Yeah, I got prosecuted by Johnny Sutton. In 06, when I got out, Ramos and Compeon, which were two Border Patrol agents in El Paso, they went through their stuff. Johnny Sutton prosecuted them, sent them to prison. And then in 06, you had Gilmer Hernandez. Mm-hmm. The last thing Johnny Sutton expected was for a measly little Border Patrol agent from Eagle Pass that he put in prison to get out and start talking against him. I've talked against him on TV. When Sean Hannity would mention my name to Johnny Sutton, the veins would pop out of his forehead. All the way to just recently, 2 years ago, during the Ken Paxton trials, when they were trying to impeach him, Johnny Sutton was the attorney for the whistleblowers. When they came out during the trial that he prosecuted me, and everybody heard my name when they told him, you know he prosecuted Gary Brugman in the Ken Paxton trials, my phone blew up. I went back on TV. I was on Michael Berry. I was on Sarah Gonzalez. I was on a couple of podcasts. I was on Stinchfield. And I just shit-talked Johnny Sutton again, told him the truth. He's a liar. He will manipulate. I didn't know much about Ken Paxton, but now I know Johnny Sutton's involved. You know, I know Ken's innocent because Johnny Sutton just likes to manipulate the law to get the outcome that he wants. He never expected that. And you got to make the noise.
Yeah. So Gary, you want to hear something crazy? 2007, on my birthday, an FBI agent was working on an ATF task force. And he saw me and he said, hey, John, come here, man. I was like, what's up? He goes, hey, Johnny Sutton's not going to prosecute your case. I go, what? He goes, well, you know I'm on that ATF task force and I'm FBI. So I listened to what they say, and I heard some agents talking that Johnny Sutton had declined prosecution on your case. And I was like, he's the one who went out for Ramos and Campione.
Yeah,
like, everyone.
and me.
Yeah, I didn't know you at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, brother, but I knew Ramos and Campione because I was like, wait a second, I know the situation that they were in and everything else. And so anyway, he tells me that, and I'm like, man, you just gave me the best birthday gift I've ever been given. Thank you so much for telling me that. And he's like, well, I know you didn't break the law. You know you didn't, but these guys, they were coming after you with both barrels, but they're done. Mm-hmm. So what do? They wait for Johnny Sutton to step down. And while there's no acting United States attorney, they go to a grand jury where you can indict a ham sandwich.
Right.
And they have me indicted. And then they go, well, the grand jury indicted them, so we have to go forward with this. So they circumvented that chain of command by doing that. That's the type of people you had in El Paso that were prosecuting cases. You have an AUSA down there who was on my case, and she was taken out of her position and demoted because she wasn't giving discovery to the defense, something that's required by law.
By law, yeah.
And she's violating the law. And that's the woman who's coming after me. And we didn't talk about this yet, but I had a case where a woman was arrested on Southwest Airlines. She ended up suing them. I was the arresting agent. I arrested her that night because I thought she broke the law. And then the next day I get together with all the agents and I'm like, what did they tell you? What did they tell you? You know, we're getting ready to write the criminal complaint. And I figure out she didn't break the law. So I go to my supervisor and he said, John, you don't wear a black robe.
To determine that.
Yeah, let the courts handle this. So he said, redact this, omit this, and take this down to the judge. So I was like, yes, sir. He was my SWAT commander and friend. And so I go down there and I'm sitting there getting ready to sign and I start getting nervous and I'm like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. So I was like, I got to talk to the judge. Well, Judge Garney, Norbert Garney, was an AUSA prior to becoming the magistrate judge there. So I knew him. So I went up to the secretary. I said, hey, can I speak to Judge Garney? Yeah. So go in. Judge Garney's like, hey, John, have a seat. What's going on? I said, Your Honor, this lady isn't guilty of this, and I'm writing this affidavit like she is. I don't feel good in it and everything else. And he goes, okay, hold on a second. He picks up the phone. He calls the AUSA, that woman, and he says to her, tell me why Agent Shipley's telling me she's innocent and you're authorizing prosecution. Well, they used to be equals. Now he gets promoted to the magistrate judge, and now he's giving it back to her. Well, she can't give it back to him, so who does she go after? Me.
Of course.
So Samantha Carrington, and you can Google it, Samantha Carrington files a lawsuit against Southwest Airlines in civil court. Her attorney is a Harvard Law grad named Enrique Moreno. He's passed away, but was a fantastic attorney and fantastic person. Enrique sues them and wins $27.8 million. She comes to me and she says, John, you were my angel. You saved me. You believed in me. I want to give you the money. I told her, I can't accept that. And, you know, I'm a knuckle dragger. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. Something told me, go report it to the FBI because it'll look inappropriate if you don't. So I went to the chief division, his name was Chris Clark, chief division counsel. And I said, Chris, I got offered a big settlement in the case for this and everything else. I turned it down because it's inappropriate, but I just want to document it so nobody does anything. Unbeknownst to me, that female prosecutor went to OIG, and there was an agent there who couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag or investigate his way out of a paper bag.
Don't tell me his name was Gary Moore.
No, it was
Okay.
Eric Ben.
Okay.
So Eric starts investigating me for accepting $27.8 million in bribes. He does that for about 8 months because the prosecutor told him to. After they figure out, hey, John doesn't have that kind of money, you know, his bank accounts, everything's legit. So then they come back and they say, well, we're going to charge him with perjury. He lied at the civil trial. So they bring me in. They swear me in. I have a FLIOA attorney that's with me. And they're like, you did this. And one's playing good cop and one's playing bad cop. And, hey, man, you better tell me the truth now because he's really going to go after you. I'm trying to help you. So, you know, and I said, guys, I've been an FBI agent for 12 years.
They're not going to intimidate me.
Yeah, come on. So after they figured out I didn't accept bribes and I didn't perjure myself, and they took the testimony from the transcripts and they matched it up to my FD-302s, they were like, we don't have them. Well, then like 6 months later, this gun is found in Mexico. And who comes after me? OIG, ATF, and that prosecutor. And you just, and I didn't get this. I thought because I was a hard charging, squared away agent that I was going to be fine. It doesn't matter who you are. No. If they want you, they're coming.
Yeah.
And that's
how the feds work. It doesn't matter. If they don't have the evidence, they'll create it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they'll twist things. They'll say, well, you lied to us. You did this. You deceived us. You know, and I'll never forget this. Eric Holder, if you're listening, I hope you are. You're a coward.
And a homo.
Well, you're a coward. Let me tell you why. He goes to Congress. Congress is sworn in, raises his hand and is sworn in. And under oath, they ask him, when did you first learn about Fast and Furious?
And he lies.
And he says, a couple weeks ago. And they're like, okay. And so they talk to him. Then he's done for the day. He goes home, living his life. And they find out, wait, he lied to us. Here's emails dating back over a year where he's talking about Fast and Furious with ATF, with Department of Justice, and all sorts of stuff. He lied to us under oath. So they brought him back before Congress. Now, those cowards in Congress should have called him on the carpet. So what does Congress do? Congress says to him, Attorney General Holder, do you remember your testimony some weeks ago? Yes, I do. And do you remember that you said that you learned of Fast and Furious just a couple of weeks prior to that testimony? Yes. Well, here is a document. And on that document, it says that this is your email address and you knew about this and blah, 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 blah. You lied to Congress under oath. And he goes, I didn't lie. I simply misled you. And they let him get away with that. But if that was Gary or that was John Shipley.
That was a real statement by him?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Not, you know, they said, you lied
exactly
to us.
what
And he
said.
said, I didn't lie. I simply misled you.
Wow.
And then immediately after that, President Obama says, you know what? If they get him, he's going to roll over on me, and I'm not going to be president, and I'm not going to be powerful, and I'm not going to be, this is going to tarnish my reputation. So what does he do? I claim executive privilege over everything Fast and Furious so you cannot discover how high this goes up. Let me tell you why I know it goes to President Obama. Who's higher than the FBI in this country? Now, I was naive when I was an agent. I thought that we were the top. We were we're it. Because in my world, it's like, okay, local police officers, sheriffs, state troopers, federal agents.
Sure.
That's about where it ends. No, the White House. And when the Attorney General and the President of the United States authorize an operation that is illegal, they're the ones calling the shots. Mm-hmm. So when I went into Mr. Cuthbertson, the SAC of the El Paso Division, I said, Mr. Cuthbertson, I said, I will take a polygraph today with no attorney present. Any person can ask me any question, and I will pass that polygraph. Give me a polygraph. He said, John, the FBI was told not to get involved in this. Who tells the FBI what to do? It's either Department of Justice or the White House.
Yeah, the Attorney General or the White House.
So when Mr. Cuthbertson was saying, I could see the look on his face, and I know what it means now, but I didn't get it back then. I was too stupid, and I drank the government Kool-Aid that we're the good guys and we're here to help. And I saw the look on his face like, son, I want to help you, but I've been ordered not to.
Can't.
And that is scary.
Sure.
When you know you're the special agent in charge of a division. You're the commanding general, the CG. You report to the president, and the CG looks you in the eyes and says, I've been told not to do anything to help you. It doesn't matter if you're innocent. Sorry. Yeah. Good luck.
So what do you expect? God willing, I pray that you get this pardon. We're going to try to make it happen. But what are you expecting if you get this pardon, if you granted this pardon, what are you expected to do?
That's a good question.
Because I expected it to do a whole lot more than what it does. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful, I'm satisfied, and I wouldn't have it any other way, but I expected it would be a whole lot more.
So I guess what I expect and what I want are two vastly different things. I think what a presidential pardon will do for me, it'll allow me to carry a firearm again. Mm-hmm. My daughter came to me not too long ago, and she's like, Dad, I want to learn how to shoot a gun so that I can protect myself. I'm a young girl. I'm in a big city. I just want it for self-protection. Can you teach me? And I told her, I can't.
Right.
I can't even go to the gun range with you. I don't go in Cabela's. If I go in Cabela's, I stay up at the front where the boats are. I don't go near the fishing because they got knives back there. I don't go by the guns. I don't look at ammunition. I stay away because I'm so paranoid of breaking the law.
Because the minute he goes through that gun section, when he goes outside, he's going to notice every black SUV that's out there.
Yeah.
Well, so people know, I think it's obvious, but to people that aren't quite familiar with it, you can go back to prison, right? Because it's a violation of
10 years in federal prison.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, cops have this recurring dream. And if they go talk to therapists and everything, they say, actually, that's really normal. The dream is this. You're doing something in your job, and you pull your duty weapon out, and you have to shoot somebody, and you're pulling that trigger, and it's not going bang. And you can't figure out why your gun is not going off. The safety's off. There's not, I've got everything lined up. Everything's perfect. That gun is not going off. And you wake up and you're like, oh my God, does that mean that I'm going to get killed or whatever? That's a normal dream for a cop to have. And I had those dreams when I was an agent. I had a dream that I went to pull a gun on somebody and it didn't go bang. And that was replaced after I was convicted. And the dream was, and still happens to this day, I'm walking down the street and I see two police officers walking towards me. And I realize I got my gun on my hip. And I'm a convicted felon. Oh my God. I'm about to go to prison and I deserve it. That scares the hell out of me. That's my dream now because I follow the rules, and that scares me to think that I could do something like that. Or I'm standing in court and I almost grabbed that gun to hand it to the witness, and I thought, I just dodged a bullet. The judge didn't know, the jury didn't know, the officer didn't know, but I knew.
Sure.
I couldn't touch that gun. So what I expect, I'll get my gun rights back. Mm-hmm. That's about all I expect.
That's about the best.
That's plenty for me. But there's still going to be people that say, well, you got a presidential pardon. That doesn't mean you're innocent.
It doesn't.
It just means that the government has removed the restrictions. So
it doesn't exonerate you at all.
As an attorney, I know that doesn't exonerate me, but
I thought it did.
No,
I thought it did.
But it gives me the opportunity that if somebody comes into my house to harm my wife and my kids, I can use the training that the government gave me to protect them. That's it.
You can also run for office.
I can't be a prosecutor. I can't be a judge as a convicted felon. I can't run for office. I can't get an apartment complex.
But now you can, because all that, you don't have to put it down anymore.
Really?
They can't. So if you're going for a government job, like, go work for the federal government, state government, whatever, you got to declare that you were convicted, but you were pardoned. In the civilian world, if you're putting for a job, you ain't got to tell them nothing. No, you weren't convicted.
Wow.
And if it shows up on the background, it shows pardon, they cannot hold it against you. That's one of the main things that happen.
Well, I know it's not everything. Like, you don't get exonerated from the crimes. They still say you were found guilty, but you were pardoned.
I found that out because my dream after I got a pardon was to become a reserve cop, because I wanted to finish serving. I do a lot of personal security, private security now, and it's not the same. It pays the bills, but it's not the same. And I wanted to be a reserve police officer. The state of Texas won't let me go to the police academy because I'm still convicted.
Yep.
It doesn't exonerate me. I'd have to get it expunged, and the feds don't like to expunge anything.
No.
Although they can, but they won't, because then they'll be proven wrong.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so the government, they don't want to admit what they did to me, because they're like, okay, it looks bad when the government puts an innocent person. They know he's innocent,
right?
And they put him in prison. And then they think, well, what's going to happen? He's going to sue us. They have immunity from suits. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they have sovereign immunity. The government, you have to actually ask the government for permission to sue them.
Really? Yeah, you can't sue the federal government unless they let you.
Gabe,
wow,
you would like to sue me? Well, I'm not going to give you permission to. So
you're not allowed.
Sorry about your lawsuit. That's what the government does.
Yeah.
So I don't expect much from it. Like, dream scenario, two things. There's a guy that used to be the district attorney out in El Paso. He prosecuted state crimes. His name's Jaime Esparza. He's a good dude. When I was on the task force out there, in the FBI, I worked on the Stash House task force, and I took a lot of cases in front of the state for prosecution for drug cases. And he was a pretty solid dude, pretty nice guy. Well, Jaime Esparza is now the United States Attorney for the Western District of Texas. Wow. So if he hears this and he wants to sit down with me and he wants to talk about it, he knows the prosecutor that went after me. He knows how corrupt she is and what a terrible prosecutor. And maybe he would be willing to overturn. So I don't know. I don't even know if he has that power.
You should call his office.
I think I will be.
Yeah. Make noise.
That guy, maybe. And then the other one is if President Trump were to sign it. Did you get to meet the president when you got it signed, or did they just ship it to you?
No.
How does that work?
They shipped this to my attorney. My attorney gave it to me. I got a phone call from the White House. It was actually who is now the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, and she told me that I got the pardon, and that was a whole story in itself. I'll tell you later.
That video you have of that is pretty.
I was invited to the White House to meet the president.
Wow!
But I was invited on January 6th.
Oh my gosh! So you were investigated by the FBI for?
No, I was in the White House actually. So when he was giving a speech while I was in the White House, and then we heard about the breach while we were in the White House, and they took him down to the Situation Room. I never got to meet him. I got to talk to him for a few seconds, a little bit after that, a couple of months after that. And then I've been to Mar-a-Lago a couple of times.
Wow.
And I did get to meet him down in Mar-a-Lago, but not for very long. I haven't actually had the chance to sit down with him. I've shook his hand. I've said thank you. He knows who I am. But weren't
you at a rally and he acknowledged you?
Yeah,
you said
that's
President Trump.
Yeah.
I have a video of that.
Oh, do you?
And every time I watch it, I go, please let that be me.
Yeah, dude.
Please, Lord.
It's a great feeling. I want to show you this. This is a letter you get from the pardon attorney. And mind you, I don't have my glasses. Where it says, Mr. Bergman, on December 23rd, the president granted you a full and unconditional pardon. The warrant signifying the president's action is enclosed, which is the certificate. It says, a presidential pardon is a sign of forgiveness. It does not erase or expunge the record of conviction and does not indicate innocence. On any application other than the document that requires the information, a pardon recipient should disclose the fact of his or her conviction. However, the information that the pardon has been granted may be included to warrant. So that's what I'm saying. On civilian jobs, you ain't even got to say it anymore. It's when you go for government jobs. A presidential pardon restores the basic civil rights and removes federal firearms disabilities imposed solely because of the conviction. You should consult with appropriate things, and you can now serve on a jury. You can vote, and you can hold public office.
Yeah.
So it's a big thing.
Oh, it's a huge thing. The president of the United States, the most powerful person on this earth.
And then they'll send you some copies. You don't get the original because the original goes into the presidential archives.
They can send me copies. I'm good.
Yeah, but they do send you one original. I don't know if I have it here. I might have left it home. They send you one original. It looks just like this, but it's got the original seal, but it's signed by the pardon attorney.
Yeah.
So that's the original that you get. But other than that, they just send you cheap copies.
So, Gabe, I'm going to tell you this. That's like a dream for me.
I'd imagine so.
It truly is. And I would carry those documents everywhere with me.
That's the original.
And, yep.
See, it's signed by the pardon attorney.
Yep. That's why I'm here. For so many years, look, if I was convicted in 2010, I've already paid the price for something I didn't do. And now it's 15 years later, I'm still fighting this battle. Why? I don't need there's no money, there's no fame, there's no nothing for me. I'm an attorney. I own my own law firm. I have a great practice. I'm good at what I do. I could just move on. Why, when you called me and said, can you come down here to where I'm at in Texas? I said, I'll be there next week.
Yeah. Why?
Because the truth needs to be told, not the story. The story's wrong. These assistant United States attorneys are great at telling a story that's believable based on little pieces of fact that they pull out. But when you look at the totality of it, they're wrong.
And they're good at it.
Yeah.
During my closing arguments, the civil rights trial lawyer, the guy that told me that they had a $50 million budget, Brent Allen Gray, he was doing closing arguments and he was facing the jury, and he told such a good bullshit story that for a split second he had me convinced I was guilty. I was like, did I really do that? And yeah, I said, no, they're good. This is what they do.
Gabe, I'll tell you, there were times that I'd be in my living room at 1 o'clock in the morning. My wife was sleeping, the kids were asleep, and I was on my knees praying to God. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, I purchased a rifle in Arizona when I was on a TDY for the SOG team. And I purchased it and I brought it back across state lines. I did violate the law. I am a felon. I am a terrible person. And I started just panicking, like having a panic attack. And then I'd go and I'd look in the book and it'd say, no, you can do that as long as it's not a handgun. And I was like, oh, thank God. I got lucky there because I thought I broke the law and I was afraid. And I thought, I deserve this. But I don't. I've been a licensed attorney since 2019. And I can tell you that based on all the training, all the years of law school, everything I've done, I have never violated the law.
With all the years of service that you guys, both you and Gary, have given, and the years of pursuing the pardon, Gary 20 years, you now 15, I can see how important that is to you guys, because it's basically the end cap on a lifelong journey of service, of being held accountable for something that you didn't do.
It's all we know how to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of people sit there and hear things like this and say, well, you're an attorney now, you're doing great, you got a great family, everything's going good. But what people don't understand is like what we talked about earlier. And this is something that we talked about just kind of off, was that damn review I got. Yeah. And how it sticks in your craw when you know that you're being told something that's not true, because it's a reflection on me, it's a reflection on the people who raised me.
It's a reflection on my dad.
Exactly. And it's like that's the important part. When you can sit there and go, I have documentation saying that I've been pardoned from something that I feel that I was wrongly convicted of. This is something, as big as it is, everything that it gives you back, your gun rights, the ability to vote, all that good stuff, the opportunity to go to your loved ones and go, look, everything that we wanted, here it is right here.
Yep.
This is proof that your son's not a criminal.
You know how much I enjoyed shooting? Like my wife at one point, I'll never forget this. She said to me, do you have a girlfriend? I was like, what? She's like, every Saturday you're going to the range, quote unquote, and you're gone for like 6-8 hours. And then you come home and clean your guns and put them away. And it's every weekend. And I said, baby, I get free ammunition from the FBI. I can shoot .223, .308, match grade .308.
I missed that.
You know, I just go down to the PFI. That's a principal firearms instructor. Mm-hmm. I go down to him and say, hey, Bob, one was Bob and one was Dave. And they were both gun guys, and they understood we like to shoot.
Don't you say Bob and Neil?
But I'd go down to them and I say, hey, instead of a couple boxes, can I get like a case? And they'd be like, yeah, I got a pallet coming in tomorrow, so I got to get this crap out of here. Take as much as you want.
Right.
And as long as we didn't sell it, which I didn't, I'd just keep it and I'd go shoot.
Are you sure?
I'm positive. That was the big one, is if you sold that stuff, you were going to jail.
Yeah, I know.
Because people don't know this, but ammunition has like almost like serial numbers or stamps
Lot
on them.
numbers.
And yeah, they can trace them back. So if it's used in a crime and it traces back to the FBI in El Paso, then they're going to the PFI Bob and they're saying, hey, who took this?
Yeah.
Right.
So I used to love to go shooting. And if you asked me, John, you were put on leave in 2007. So that is 18 years ago. We have to back pay you $120,000 for 18 years. That's what, I'm not a math guy, but that's more than $1.5 million, somewhere in that. So you have a choice. You can either get a presidential pardon and have your gun rights back, or you can have that back pay. Which would you want? I'll take my gun rights. Because right now, the day that I'm unarmed and somebody comes into it, whether it's my church or my house or a public place, and does something evil,
You can't defend yourself.
I can't.
You can't defend your family.
I could use those skills that the government taught me to save lives, but they've taken that away from me. And they know I will never break those rules.
Yeah.
I've had friends say to me, hey, man, I've got 400 acres out here. Nobody will know. And I told them, God will know, and I'll know. And I won't do that. I will not touch a firearm until President Trump says you can.
You know, one thing that I want to impress upon people that aren't gun people, because there's a lot of them out there. I got a lot of friends that aren't into guns, and that's fine. But one thing that people don't quite understand, and maybe I'm being a little corny and cheesy, but it's like having the ability to exercise your gun rights there's a security aspect to it, but what people don't understand is when you come across a guy who's a gun guy or a gun girl, that person learned to shoot from their dad, from with their mom. They went with their cousins. They went rabbit hunting with some buddies. They went dove hunting with some friends. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, what people don't understand is there's this bonding that you do with your family members and your friends and your loved ones over guns. You know, my sister bought a property down south just so she could put a shooting range on it, so we could all go shoot and barbecue and hang out.
Yep.
And it's like,
so my first,
You never taken me there.
yeah.
I'll take you whenever you want to go.
Hey, if I get a pardon, we're going. We're going. The barbecue's on me. We're going to have a party. Let me tell you something. My first sniper instructor was my grandma in Indiana. And so my dad went to Vietnam, and my dad served 23 years in the Army. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, Dad, I want to be a cop one day, and I want to learn about guns and everything else. And my dad said, son, I have seen enough death for my lifetime and yours. You will never bring a gun into my home. I will not allow them. Now, I had so much respect and love for my father that I never did. I never would. And in fact, when I came home from the FBI Academy, I took my gun out of my holster and I put it in the trunk of my car and I locked it up. And I went into my parents' house, and my dad said to me, son, you're an FBI agent now. And I said, yeah. And he goes, they give you a gun? I said, yeah, they gave me a 6 hour 229 40 caliber, you know. And he goes, where's that gun? I said, it's locked up in my car. He said, well, son, you're an FBI agent. You can carry that gun on a plane. You can go anywhere with that gun.
I missed that too.
Yeah. He goes, you can bring it in my house. And I said, Dad, you told me when I was younger that I could never bring a gun in, and I never will. And he said, well, I think if the FBI trusts you, I can trust you too. My dad, he's my best friend. He was the best man at my wedding. It hurts me. It hurts him. And he's going to die soon. He's 81 years old, about to turn 82. He's got Agent Orange. He's had cancer. None of us are going to make it through this thing. We all die.
Sure.
I don't want him to leave this earth and not know that I didn't do the. I mean, he knows I didn't do it, but I want
some
a
sort of
pardon.
validation.
Yeah, that says, hey, our government recognized you got screwed. You were the fall man. You got thrown under the bus. We lied about operation. I don't even need them to acknowledge that for me to be happy. That's how stupid I am. I'm like, I don't care about that. I don't like these ATF people that planned it, and the Department of Justice, and Eric Holder and President Obama. I don't care if they have a blemish on their record over Fast and Furious or not. I don't care. You were in that position. You made that decision. That's way above my pay grade. But I'm getting crapped on down here, and I need some help. And that's what I care about. I'm not looking for vengeance. I'm just looking for somebody to realize, hey, John didn't do this. Now, the guys that know me and served with me are still my best buds. That's what's crazy. But
They'll stick by you.
I had a DEA agent that came up to me when this whole thing happened. He's like, John, how could you sell guns to the cartel? You piece of bird. And I was like, dude, you and I have gone through buildings together. We've cleared, we've gone into harm's way. You know me. And he's like, I thought I did. But if the government says you did it, you did it. I was like,
Yeah, but that's those DEA sissies talking anyway.
no, I tell you what, I'm going to say this to your listeners. There are some total studs in every organization, and there are some total duds. I remember telling my dad when I got out of the Army, and you'll identify with this. I said, Dad, I can't wait to join the FBI. He goes, why? I said, because everybody's going to be hard charged and squared away. And he goes, John, every organization is made out of people, and there are going to be your really squared away guys that are hard charging, like my friend here, and there are going to be these people that just show up to get a paycheck. I said, no, Dad, you don't get it. This is the FBI. They filter people. He said, talk to me in 5 years. So I go to El Paso. I show up. There's a guy. His name's Carlos. And he's sitting down in his cubicle. And they say, hey, we need bodies to go out on an arrest. Anybody want to go? I was like, oh, yeah, I'm in. Let's go. And I say, hey, Carlos, we're going out on an arrest. You want to go? And he goes, no, I haven't read the paper yet. I was like, we'll be here when you get back. And he goes, no, I don't want to get involved in that crap. Do you know that guy went all the way through to retirement and is now collecting a paycheck?
I was going to say, probably the smartest guy in the FBI right
I
now.
was going to say he's probably running things.
We had one of those in the Border Patrol, man. If there was census going off south, he was heading north. If he was going off north, he was heading south.
It's funny how those guys always make management.
And
they
dude, and
do.
he's retired, living. I said, I didn't realize he was the smartest guy.
Yeah. But if you're an aggressive, hard-charging agent, you follow the rules and do everything right. People don't like that,
right.
And I didn't get that. Like somebody said to me one time, "Hey, how many people did you arrest this month?" And I was like, like 13. And they're like, "Why so many?" And I was like, "Actually, that's pretty slow for me." And they're like, "What?" And I was like, "Listen, Brad, I had a partner, and he's 6'4", 240 pounds of sheer muscle, and he's an absolute beast of a person and a stud and a great guy." And I was blessed to have him as my sniper partner. And Brad and I, we went like toe to toe. Everybody's like, hey, on the SWAT team, they're like, we want to see you two guys fight. We want to see which one of you would win. But we never did because we respected each other. And he was my best friend, but he was also my moral compass. I'd go to him and be like, hey, am I wrong on this? This is how I feel. And he'd be like, no. And great dude. I mean, salt of the earth guy. But you would not want to cross him.
Sure.
And he's just an outstanding agent. I met so many agents that really, like when I was listening to your podcast the other day and I was listening about Agent Zapata and everything else, I thought, man, that guy talking, he's just like me. He said, I'm a working agent. And I was like, oh, that's me. I told my wife a long time ago, I am a plow horse. Just hook me up and leave me alone, and I'm going to plow that field every day until I die. And I know I'm going to work until God takes me. As long as I'm able
we
to
need to
get
work
up
on getting a pardon. That's what we need to work on. We need to get you on more podcasts. Anybody listening, any three of you listening to this podcast? Four now. Five. You know, any five of you want to have John on the podcast, how can people get hold of you?
You know, what's the best way to get hold of you? Super easy to find. Just Google Attorney John Shipley Fort Worth, and you're going to see my website for my law firm. It's going to have a number on there, and you can call my secretary and say, hey, I've got a podcast, or I've got this, or I've got that, and I'd like John to come in. I've got a million stories about this. But to me, I didn't know to get the word out until Gary was like, man, you got to start. I thought if I write in the pardon, if I write President Obama or Attorney General Holder, they're going to be like, oh, no, this guy, he just hates the government.
Sure.
You know, he's here to grind an axe. I'm not. I don't care about that. All I care about is the truth coming out, my dad seeing this before he leaves, and one day my grandkids don't think Grandpa is a criminal.
And, you know, like you talked about earlier, I'm the same way. I want to be quiet and hope people do the right thing. But in meeting Gary and getting to know Gary, realizing how many people Gary knows through his journey trying to get a pardon, there's a lot of legwork to do, you know. And when I think about what Gary did, and he describes the process and the people who helped him out, there's a lot to it. And so my wish for you is to turn into a loudmouth Puerto Rican from New York, because the only way people are going to know that the building's on fire is if they see the smoke. And there's a lot of push and a lot of self-promotion, and people like me and you, and I'm not saying this is a negative thing, but we're not really huge self-promoters, right? Yeah. We just kind of, we want people to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, because that's how we operate. But sometimes people need to see that there's a problem so that they can potentially help on that problem.
You know, and for me, I'm not talking about Gary, I'm just talking about me. I don't like asking for help.
Sure.
I like helping people.
I didn't either.
Most people don't.
I love helping people. Yeah. That's my whole practice is people that have been arrested and they need a criminal defense attorney. So I love helping people. But for me to go and say, hey, Gabe, I know you don't know me from Adam, but I need your help.
So, John,
it's so humbling.
I rode with a bunch of police officers for a long time. I was part of a motorcycle club. I started the law enforcement motorcycle club called the Iron Pigs. Had a lot of cop brothers. When I was going to prison, I had nothing left. I was losing everything. My mom, my cop buddies got me together and they said, hey, sometimes you got to ask for help. You can't always be the rescuer, especially I was in the Coast Guard. I'm a rescuer, you know. You got to ask for help. You got to let people help. While I was in prison, my freaking LE buddies went to my mom's place, took her to get groceries, checked on her. They wrote me, she's good, we're here. You know, my mom would write me, yeah, they were just here the other day, all of them in uniform. You know, they'd see her walking back from Walmart, they'd pick her up, take her home. Sometimes you just got to ask for help. Yeah. You know, you can't do it all by yourself.
Well, in my church in El Paso, I used to have people came up to me and they'd shake my hand on Sunday and they'd have a $20 bill in their hand and they'd be like, take your kids out for pizza. And I'd be like, I felt useless. As a man, we are there to provide for our wife and our children. And I know there's feminists out there that are going to get upset with that statement, but that's how I look. If I have to go without something so that my wife can have it, she's going to have it. If I have to go without something so my kids can have it, they're going to have it. And when you suddenly have no job and you've gone from this position of, you go to a party and somebody says, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm an FBI agent. They're like, oh, man, that's awesome. But when the dragon
comes and whips his tail,
it's a different story.
You know, I was talking to a guy, he's a personal security guy. His name is Mike Ramirez.
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Never met that guy.
Never heard of him.
We're having a conversation, I think, offline at one point, and we talked about ego, you know, and I was telling him how much of a difficult time I have with certain things, and he would say, that's your ego. You know, you've got to kill your ego. And that's easier said than done, especially for people that don't ask for much, right? I don't want things from people very often, you know, and I try and live my life in a manner that I don't need much from other people. Well, occasionally I do, but I try not to, right? I like to be the giver, right?
Yeah.
But that's my ego, you know, and there's times in our lives where we've got to acknowledge that that's our ego. As much as we think we're doing the right thing and it makes us feel good, our ego is telling us, no, don't ask.
So I have.
It's important.
I gotta ask him for favors all the time. I'm gone from my house. I'm like, dude, can you go by my house, get my keys off my kitchen table, and check my mail? Yeah. Because I'm gone and I got packages sitting there. I'm like, dude, you're the only one near my house.
Yeah, and again, that's I don't mind. You know,
right?
I'll go over there. I'll help. I think we gave you a ride the other day to the HEB, and it's like these are minor things. These are minor things. You know, you're seeking something major. You know, and this is the important thing that I know you get this, but seeking help for something as big as this takes a lot of swallowing pride and putting your ego aside. But being able to provide help to other people, you've already done that in the past, you'll continue to do in the future. There's a trade-off there, right? And to me, it always comes back to doing the right thing. You know, it's a godly thing, right? We're pursuing, we're going through life together, right? And if I can lend you a hand, if I can give you a voice, if the right people can hear your story and go, man, I didn't know about that. You know, it's not, hey, it's not a matter of, hey, that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
That makes me happy for you. And we need to learn, especially as men, we need to learn to accept that, you know, and be thankful for it. And you don't owe anybody. Just be thankful. And that's it. So anything else you want to share with folks?
Well, I'm just going to say this. Brian Terry, he's in heaven because of a gun from Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
And Jaime Zapata and the Benghazi and, you know,
who knows how many others.
Me losing my job and how many innocent people, civilians in Mexico, were executed with guns related to this. Yeah. And our government's just, they're glazing over it. We have to hold them accountable. You know, when you had that podcast and he was talking about running for Congress, and I thought, man, that's a guy I'd vote for because he's been there, boots on the ground, he knows what's going on. You know, he said, I'm not against immigration, I just want legal immigration. Right. And I thought, oh my God, you can't say that anymore in this country. But he did. And he said, I'm willing to go to Congress and say, hey, do things right and you're good. Do things wrong, you're not good. I was like, man, that's so simple if we just get those people into those positions. And my wife said to me, well, you've gone to law school and you've been in federal law enforcement, you've been an officer in the military. Why don't you become a congressman or a senator or something like that? And I'm like, I don't know that I want to do that. I just really want this to be corrected. And then I just want to go on serving my family and my Lord.
Yeah.
You know? But as Gary said, we're idiots. If they came to me and said, hey, President Trump wants you to be the director of the ATF and he wants you to overhaul them and he wants them to start following the law and doing things right, I'd be like, yes, sir. Stand at attention, salute him, and say, thank you, sir.
See, he's got higher standards than me. I'd be happy just going back being a freaking car washer at the Border Patrol.
Well, fellas. All right, so fellas, we'll get this wrapped up. Thank you, Amanda.
But the thing is, John, make the noise. Try to get you on as many podcasts and news as we can. Call everybody.
I will.
Just get it out there, man. We got to get it out there. Social media. I don't know if you have it, but that's one way to get it out there.
I don't. I'm a dinosaur. You're gonna have to teach me.
Yeah, that's simple. You know.
All right.
That's a way people.
Well, if anybody's listening that can help, I mean, politicians, web designers, whoever you are.
Did you just say you're a dinosaur?
I am.
You know you're younger than me, right?
No. You look 10 years younger than I do.
I'm going to be 60 next year, bro.
I'm 55.
Well, dude, younger than me. That's 5. I'm a 66 model.
Yeah, it was a good year.
It was. I was born.
Well, John, if I can help you with anything else in the future, I wish you luck. I think a pardon for you is gonna really do great things for you emotionally, for one, because I think you've always done the right things, it seems like, and I feel like you're going to continue to do that. But I think emotionally, that's going to be a lot of burden lifted off of you. So I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, for coming on. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
Yo, Barry.